across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. Loads to talk about today, including the failure of Lucy Connelly's appeal. Why did it fail? Why is she still in prison for 2.5 years for sending a social media message, especially when so many other offenders avoid prison terms? We'll talk about Keir Starmer as well. He's been in the Parliament selling his deal today, saying what wonderful benefits there are for the Brexit deal. He's also sent a tweet to say, you know how it goes. All you want to do is start your holiday, but you get off the plane to never-ending queues at passport control. My deal with the EU means more Brits will be able to sail through the E-gates instead, getting you to the beach sooner. Yeah, I'm sure that's a really good reason to accept the deal. 12 years of fishing rights for EU members in our waters. There's a lot to be discussed here. We will discuss it today. We'll also discuss whether a Gulf Pact will happen after the EU trade deal. Israel, very interesting as well. The UK suspending trade talks, summoning the ambassador over the Gaza offensive. Also fury as the army bans troops from supporting veterans that many argue have been betrayed in public. We're talking about the kids breaking the law if they kick their ball over a neighbour's fence. Honestly, really, is that what it's all about? We're also talking about a man who helped smuggle more than 3,000 people into Europe who's been jailed, and Greg's making a huge decision about shoplifters. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the sport. We'll talk about the Tories plummeting in the polls to 4th place as well. As always, this is my show, but it's your show too. I want to make sure that you get your voice on the air. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice message. You can send me a text message, or you can give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Keep the voice messages to less than a minute, please, so we can play out as many of them as we can. Loads to discuss between now and 7 o'clock here on Talk Drive. Jane says, perhaps the Prime Minister sorted the E-gate issue so his friends with second homes could get there quicker. So many of your audience cannot afford a holiday and haven't done so for years. I know exactly what you mean, Jane. The cost of living, the squeeze, many people are giving up. Things like holidays, they are deciding to stay at home or have some sort of cheaper break where they don't go abroad, although sometimes when you stay in the UK, it can be very pricey too, especially during school holidays and things like that. We'll talk about all of that. Let me know your thoughts, whether you're listening at home, whether you're listening in the car, whether you're one of the car dwellers. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about Lucy Connelly now, the mother jailed for the Southport tweet, losing her appeal. She will not be released early. The Court of Appeal has refused to reduce her sentence. She was charged and pled guilty to inciting racial hatred. Her lawyers had argued that she had not fully understood what she was pleading guilty to, and also that the original judge had failed to give enough weight to various mitigating factors, including the welfare of her 12-year-old daughter. That is something that has been rejected by the Court of Appeal. She is going to serve her whole sentence of 31 months, over 2.5 years in prison. Her husband Ray said, "I'm heartbroken that my wife Lucy's appeal was not upheld by the Court of Appeal. It feels shocking and unfair. The 284 days of separation have been very hard, particularly on our 12-year-old girl." Lucy posted one nasty tweet when she was upset and angry about 3 little girls who were brutally murdered in Southport. She realised the tweet was wrong and deleted it within 4 hours. That did not mean Lucy was a far-right thug, as Sir Keir Starmer claimed. "My wife Lucy is a good person and not a racist. As a childminder, she took care of small children of African and Asian heritage. They loved Lucy as she loved them. My wife has paid a very high price for making a mistake, and today the court has shown her no mercy." He also continued, "Lucy has got more time in jail for one tweet than some paedophiles and domestic abusers get. I think the system wanted to make an example of Lucy so other people will be scared to say things about immigration. This is not the British way." Just a reminder of what Lucy Connelly actually did put on social media. She shouldn't have put it on social media. My position on this is that she should have been given something like a caution. I don't think that she should have any custodial time for sending this message. But you may think differently. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. She posted, after Axel Radicubana went on the knife rampage at do you remember on Southport, obviously, the Taylor Swift themed holiday club, murdering those beautiful 3 little girls. Connelly went on social media and she said, mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bees. For all I care, while you're at it, take the treacherous government politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing that these Southport families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. That to me is not something that should land someone in jail. It's not nice, it's not right, it's clearly inciting violence. She should have got a caution, something like that. Ben Jones is Director of Case Management at the Free Speech Union. Ben, what do you make of this?
It's bitterly disappointing. It feels palpably unfair and unjust. We're very disappointed for Lucy and for her family that this is the result. We've been supporting her for a long time. I agree entirely with what you have just said, and I think that this sentence and the decision today with respect to her appeal are entirely grossly disproportionate to what she actually said. And if you look, as you've just done, at the detail of what she said, I think the key phrase is "for all I care." At the worst, you can say that she is expressing indifference to violence, and she realised that that was wrong and she deleted it 4 hours later, within 4 hours. This is not somebody who was seeking to stir up violent unrest. This is not somebody who wanted actually to see hotels full of people set on fire. She said something that she very immediately regretted, that she recognised that she should not have said. And nonetheless, I think many people today looking at this will feel that she has been made an example of.
Her barrister, Adam King, asked her in court, did you intend anyone to set fire to any asylum hotels? She replied, absolutely not. Mr. King went on, did you intend anyone to murder any politicians? Again, she answered, absolutely not. The Court of Appeal judges said they did not accept the original sentence of 31 months was manifestly excessive. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I know that these are points of law, but 31 months, a blind man on a galloping horse knows that that is an incredibly excessive sentence. Is there a precedent for this, or was she being made an example of?
I think, unfortunately, it's difficult to see what the next steps might be. The hope will be now that she will only be expected to serve 40%, I say only in inverted commas, of this sentence. And so it's difficult to see what the future options might be for her. I think what I would say with respect to how unfair this is, clearly it's unfair on its own terms. But when you look at some of the sentences that have been handed out to other people, people who actually were engaged in violence, people who did take part in rioting, or people who have even committed sexual offences against children in the last 10 or 15 years, have been given less severe sentences than the sentence which Lucy has been given. So it's not just that it looks unfair, that it somehow feels unfair. When you compare it to those people, to those cases, it manifestly is unfair. And if this is a legally sound decision, then the law is at fault and the law must be changed, because I think overwhelmingly the public will recognise that this is disproportionate, that it is not right that a mother of a 12-year-old girl who has not committed any violent crime, who did not actually intend to incite violence, should be in prison.
Is this two-tier justice, do you think?
I think the suspicion will be for many, many people, millions of people who will have been following this story, that this is a sign of two-tier justice, because it is so palpably unfair, as I've said a moment ago, when you compare it to these other cases. And I think the trouble we have in this country fundamentally with this analysis of two-tier policing and a two-tier justice system is that successive governments, as you know very well, for the last 30 years have been embarked upon a course of policy with respect to immigration, a colossal failure of integration that is wildly unpopular. And the wheels clearly are coming off that experiment. Even Keir Starmer seems to be of that view. He says he is of that view. And for people who are expressing their views about their concerns, sometimes in a way that is unpalatable, unvarnished, rough around the edges, sometimes in a way, as Lucy has done, which frankly was unwise and went too far, those people are facing, it seems, a relentless crackdown. There is a chilling effect that we see at the Free Speech Union from hundreds of people contacting us every month for assistance or for advice.
Again, Ben, I'm not a lawyer, but as far as I can see, she did incite racial hatred here. I think she did that. My point is that I mean, what punishment, if any, do you think she should have received? My position is that she should have got a caution or something like that, or perhaps a fine.
I think there's a whole spectrum of responses which most people, myself included, would have said, OK, fair enough, that is reasonable. She should not have used that form of words. She should not have said that. Clearly, she went too far. She herself accepts that she went too far. There's a whole range of responses that would have been reasonable, I think.
Listen, thank you very much. That's Ben Jones there. He's Director of Case Management at the Free Speech Union. Colleen's been in touch and says, no one will tell me anything other than Lucy Connelly is a political prisoner. One person says, adding, for all I care makes this as an opinion. We don't imprison people for voicing opinions, no matter how awful. Her lawyers need to be prosecuted for making her plead guilty. Well, I'm sure those lawyers would say that they represented her well. Lucy Connelly remains in prison after losing her appeal. Craig has been in touch from Lincoln. Craig, you're very welcome to the programme. Craig's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. What would you like to say, Craig?
Hiya, Peter. Yeah, I'm just a bit confused, really. I don't understand how Lucy Connelly is still in jail for what she did when she sent it out on a tweet, which doesn't necessarily go to people that have got any respect for or even know her, for instance. But Kneecap, who actually told their fans at a concert they should go and kill their MP.
Kill your local MP. That is what Kneecap said.
Not any criminal charges. They actually appeal, I believe.
Craig, it's a bad line. It's a bad line, I'm afraid. But I think you've made a very, very good point there when you said that these absolute thugs, Kneecap, the band, who said "kill your local MP" and many, many other deeply offensive and insightful things. Nothing's happened to them yet, apparently. There's an investigation ongoing. Lucy Connelly made it clear, look, her words were stupid. I don't think she should have done it. I think she did incite racial hatred. Should she be in prison for 31 months? Kneecap, nothing's happened to them. Absolutely nothing. They've had a few concerts cancelled. They haven't been arrested. They haven't been charged. Nothing has happened there. Craig makes a really, really good point. And there's so many people who will look at this and see two-tier justice in our country today. Every case has to be taken on its merits. Sometimes there are nuances and different things. But listen, I totally get the point and the frustration that Craig and many other people have. David's in London and has some thoughts on this as well. David, you're on the air. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Peter. Look, as far as I'm concerned, it's political with a capital P. I agree with you earlier when you said they're making an example of her. This is a lady with two small children who absolutely lost it when she saw that, you know, the three kids have been stabbed to death up in Southport. She lost it. She's done a stupid thing, but it's political, and it's just... We're getting more and more, I'm afraid, we're getting a bit like Russia, Peter. They're banging people up now. I saw, I'm not a particular supporter, but Tommy Robinson's being released in the next couple of days. There's another political one for you.
Well, I think that Lucy Connelly is certainly someone who shouldn't be in prison for that huge length of time. I think something should happen to people who incite racial violence as she did, but I don't think they should be in prison for 2.5 years. You look at so many people, look, as was a point was made to me just before I came on air by someone in the office who said every case has to be taken on its merits, and I totally get that. But there'll be loads of people who will look at, for example, Hugh Edwards. You know, the guy's a paedophile and he's not spending a day in prison.
Absolutely right. And look, without dropping myself in it, someone should be looking across the table tonight when he has dinner with his wife and thinking, is this really fair? Yeah, I think a lot of people will be thinking about that. David, thank you for your thoughts on that. Appreciate that. Esther's been in touch and says, hi Peter, Lucy Connelly is in prison because she pled guilty to inciting violence and a racist tweet. She is misadvised by her solicitors, and because of them she is now in prison. She took their words and advice because she had never been in trouble before, so you presume the solicitors know their stuff, but unfortunately it was bad advice. Well, look, I'm sure her solicitors and barristers and so on would say they gave her good advice. It is a point that we don't know what Lucy Connelly
Connelly thinks about that. What we do know, certainly, is that this appeal has not been successful. We know that the Court of Appeal has denied it. There's a lot to discuss on this, and if you want to get your voice on the air, the number is 0344 499 1000. Paul says, I'd just like to thank our glorious leader for sorting the queuing at airport. There have been problems for airports. There have been problems for all of us who have never been able to afford and use them, says Paul. You go, big man. Dana says, good afternoon. I'm sure the British people are able to sleep comfortably in their beds knowing that a former BBC newsreader who was convicted of having disgusting images of underage children is free to walk the streets. But a mother who posted something unpleasant on Twitter is being kept in prison for the next couple of years. I know we shouldn't conflate these two situations, but we all know it's true. Terrible decision today, says Dennis in Manchester. Dennis, we're not necessarily conflating them. We're saying, and I agree with you, and we do need to be cautious around all of this and look at things on their merits. But the fact is that Hugh Edwards is a paedophile and is free. Lucy Connelly sent something she shouldn't have sent. She's apologised for it. She said in court her intention was certainly not to do what it said on the tin. I mean, the next day, the day after widespread disorder, she wrote FFS, which means for F's sake, if you don't know. I get they're angry. I'm effing raging. However, this is playing right into their hands. I do not want civil unrest on our streets. Protests, yes, but not riots. It's pretty clear she was very, very angry about Southport. A load of people were really angry about Southport. I was really angry about Southport. I covered it on this programme. We talked about it together. Why she's in prison, I don't know, and I'm worried about the state of justice in this country. I'm worried about the fairness, and that is at the heart of this story. Lots more to discuss in just a minute, about including another aspect of fairness, whether the Brexit deal is fair, whether there's really anything in it for us here in the UK. The Prime Minister's been talking today. We'll talk to a former advisor to the Brexit Secretary. Nick Dubois will be with us in just a second. He always makes clear what these things really mean. We'll hear a bit from the Prime Minister as well, some of those clips from that press conference, the statement to Parliament earlier on here on Talk.
What do they mean by black? I mean, do they mean just dark-skinned people? The Beaker people
was too busy swigging champagne yesterday afternoon than come into Parliament to explain his actions and to be scrutinised democratically by MPs and peers, which is outrageous. And this whole thing now, they've introduced sort of clauses that, quite frankly, I think in the sense of democratic freedom and openness and free trade, we absolutely have to scrutinise and run the slide rule over. It is wrong. He didn't have the mandate to do that. You know, he could only say he had the mandate to do that if he was honest with the
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Well, it's been a big day because it's sort of day two of trying to sell the EU deal, the reset, the Brexit betrayal, many are calling it. Earlier, the Prime Minister faced MPs as the backlash to his EU deal grows.
Does it drive down bills? Does it drive up jobs? Does it strengthen our borders? And in each case, the answer is resoundingly yes. These deals release us from the tired arguments of the past and, as an independent sovereign nation, allow us to seize the opportunities of the future. A clear message sent across the globe that Britain is back on the world stage. That is what these deals represent. A signal that we're back on the world stage, a global champion of free trade playing our historic role on European security, but above all, making deals that put money in the pockets of working people. Because, Mr. Speaker, that is what independent sovereign nations do.
It'll all be fine. Everything will be marvellous. Do you know he wasn't convinced? There's a woman called Kemi Badenoch. I don't know if you've ever come across her. She's the leader of the opposition, something called the Conservative Party. This is what she had to say.
When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. The terms are improved for the EU. And the Prime Minister can dress it up as much as he wants, but he has failed. It is bad for bills, it is bad for jobs, and it is bad for borders. This is not a deal made for Britain. This is a deal made for Labour's PR, to show them on the world stage. But it is a stitch-up for our country for their short-term headlines.
I can't really disagree with very much of that. The Conservatives, though, are in fourth place below the Liberal Democrats at the moment. Let's talk about all of this with Nick Dubois. He is a former advisor to Dominic Raab when he was Brexit Secretary. No stranger to this station, a presenter on here as well. Nick, what is actually in this for Britain? Because I can see the security guarantees. I can see that we may well have a better relationship on that front. But aside from that, apart from getting through e-gate slightly quicker, I'm not really sure that I'm happy with the 12 years of fishing rights and huge amount of cash that we've had to spend on this, for example. Is Kemi Badenoch just right when she says when Labour negotiates, Britain loses?
Well, I think Kemi Badenoch, Peter, hello. Good.
Hello, lovely to see you.
So many thoughts are going through my head because it took me back to those Brexit negotiations.
PTSD.
And a little bit of that. And look, the mistake we made when we were in power negotiating with the EU was we underestimated the EU. It's simple as that. They are skillful negotiators. They have a lot of cards in their pocket, and they remained united. And I have to say, I think that the government this time underestimated the EU. They set themselves up to actually end up with an agreement that is simply here. You have our fish for another 12 years. And yes, there are some gains, if you like, in terms of security and defence. And I think we all can kind of see where that's going. But it's nothing more than agreement to agree. That is it. Now, what they are going to agree and the price of what we've given up, I think is going to be judged poorly in the future. For example, doing a trade deal, Labour are telling everyone today, when you do a trade deal with another bloc, you always do trade-offs, you give things up. That is true. But actually, what we've done here is we've entered into an agreement to agree a trade deal where we will, yes, gain freer access for certain amounts of foods, but unlike other trade deals, where if you have a dispute, you have an arbitration method to sort it out, we basically said, over to you. We are giving you the sovereign right to make decisions through your courts. That's a win for the EU, right? They're good at what they do. When it comes to the Defence and Security Pact, even there, whilst I welcome the principles behind it, we're going to pay to join a scheme that will allow us to bid for work when we actually have no idea how much work we will win or even be allowed to do. It is an open deal that favours the EU because, once again, Britain failed to actually understand.
And on the fisheries stuff as well, we had in the press release, Starmer was saying, well, we're going to back up our fishing industry by giving them 360 million quid. If you have done a good deal for your country, you don't need to put more taxpayers' money into an industry you've just saved. The fact is they haven't just saved it. He stopped a few boats, but the boats he has stopped are fishermen who are going out there to fish our waters for 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fishermen have been sacrificed here in return for getting closer to the EU. It's as simple as that. And they've made a calculation that something, because fishing is about 0.03% of our economy, I'm not doing it down, that still represents several thousand workers and so forth. And they've traded that off for basically the food and agricultural products that we all know are going to effectively pass more smoothly through the borders. It's a done deal. But they also set themselves up to fail again, because they were so desperate, the government, to actually have an announcement, something to say that the EU did something they've been doing for decades, Peter, which is coming at the last minute with sweeping demands, hold you to ransom.
Yeah.
And we basically capitulated for the sake of a deal. Now, look, at the end of the day, people are going to make their own minds up. But I think Labour have got one thing right, and this is causing problem for the Conservatives. Actually, I genuinely think most of the public, I'm not saying the people who listen to the great station of talk necessarily, but I don't think they're going to worry about this too much at all.
I saw some really interesting polling actually earlier this week saying that there's so many people who don't think Brexit happened in the first place anyway, in any tangible way, and that Boris Johnson's deal was not a good one. Therefore, if you tinker with it and you change it in the way that Starmer's done, what's the difference really anyway? Because they have failed to see the benefits of Brexit that we were told were going to happen, such as taking back control of our borders, more money for the NHS, etc.
No, look, let's be honest, taking back control of your borders, that was a joke. It was a ridiculous thing to say, and it's been found wanting under the Conservatives. Boris Johnson's deal really didn't do very much except bring Brexit to an end. And most people are not going to worry about the European courts deciding essentially whether their lettuce can or cannot pass through the port of Dover. So I think Labour have calculated wisely there. The Conservatives are in an absolute mess. I think they've actually need...
fourth in the polls, Nick. Did you think you'd see a day where the Conservatives were at their lowest point than when you were in government, Theresa May's government, negotiating this deal? They're down below the Liberal Democrats, 16% in some polls.
Well, I think anyone who leads the Conservative Party who served in the last government is doomed to failure. Yeah. It really is, I think, as simple as that. But the Conservatives really now need to find their mettle and find their space. I like it when the Conservatives are talking about getting us as the most competitive country in the world, talking about Singapore on Thames, talking about deregulation. They should be attacking this deal politically. If they want to attack this deal, don't just say it's a sellout. Actually explain why it may not make us more competitive, why it may cost us more jobs. How can Labour come to the dispatch box and say, this is going to create more jobs and it's going to lower your bills? Don't you remember them saying they were going to get electricity bills down by £300?
I mean, there's so many things that Labour said on the Conservatives previously that weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Earlier on today, the notable Brexiteer, now Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel, spoke to Mike Graham on his breakfast show Morning Glory about the deal. This is what Priti Patel had to say.
People, your viewers, your listeners, they gave the then Conservative government of the day in 2016 a clear instruction, which was to leave the EU. And what we're now seeing is sheer dishonesty from Keir Starmer and his appalling Labour government that have deceived the public. You know, yes, they said they'd have a reset, but what they've effectively done is that they're signing up to a foreign court, the European Court of Justice all over again. We've got to pay for the privilege of the indignity of going back into the European Court and being a rule taker, and they've sold out our fishermen with a 12-year deal. And I understand that Starmer went into the negotiations saying he wanted a 4-year deal, but has come out 100 times worse with a 12-year deal.
I mean, it's not 100 times worse, it's 3 times worse. But anyway, there we are. What do you make of what Priti Patel said there, Nick?
Well, look, there's nothing actually wrong in the sense that what she's highlighting has happened. But this is pointless ground for the Conservatives. I'd much rather they were attacking it as you did a deal and got nothing in return. Yeah. You've not actually helped grow this country's economy with this deal, because first of all, they've got something from it. They've got fisheries from it. They've got things out of you, but we haven't got anything back. Yeah. All that the Conservatives are doing at the moment is trying to out-reform reform. Peter, you've been in politics long enough to know when a party does that, they never, actually win the argument.
You're never going to win the argument. You're never going to get those votes back trying to do that. Nick, thank you so much. Really good to talk to you. Nick Dubois there, former advisor to the Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, and of course, contributor and presenter on this station. What do you think to what Nick said there? 0344 499 1000. One person says, if Starmer agrees to Gibraltar being part of the Schengen area, could any migrant claim asylum there and automatically get to Britain? I think there are a lot of what-ifs in that, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. Jackie says, I am genuinely scared that this country is slipping into totalitarianism. We have lost freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to live our lives without state interference. I don't want my kids or grandkids to grow up into this country if they can't be free. Terry and Birmingham, very good point. Let's not forget the Labour MP who battered a man let out just like that. Of course, it is political in regard to Lucy Connelly. He's referring there to Mike Amesbury, who was the Labour MP who literally repeatedly punched a constituent. He pleaded guilty. He had a 10-week prison sentence suspended following an appeal. He is a free man. Why is Lucy Connelly not free? The two are different cases. There's different context. There's different law around that. But Lucy Connelly wrote something. Mike Amesbury physically connected a number of times and punched a constituent. It's just another very good example of what people will see. One person on the right, one person on the left being treated differently. What do you think of all this? 0344 499 1000. And do you know what? I'd love to hear from someone who says, Starmer's EU deal, marvellous, brilliant, love it, think it's fantastic. We had one person yesterday out of literally hundreds of people contacting us during yesterday's drive time programme saying that she welcomed it because she was getting through e-gates faster. To me, that may well be a good thing, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the most important part of this. We're going to talk about Israel in a second because the UK, France and Canada have warned of sanctions for Israel over the suffering in Gaza. In fact, the ambassador, CP Hodaveli, has been summoned to the Foreign Office and given a dressing down. The UK suspending Israel trade talks and talking about that. We'll also talk to Simon Diggins for his analysis and go live to Israel in just a second. Let us know your thoughts on that too. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Some breaking news now on Talk, and the Telegraph is reporting that Gary Lineker could face a police investigation over the anti-Semitic Instagram post that prompted his BBC exit. Officers from Scotland Yard have visited at least one complainant who told the officer she suffered significant distress over the social media post last week. There's no decision on a formal police investigation, but one family has got a crime reference number on this. They have at least looked into it. A Metropolitan Police statement says we have received a number of reports from members of the public relating to a post published on social media on the 12th of May. The reports will be assessed to determine what further action might be required. There is currently no police investigation into this matter. There may not be, but that's something that was on social media. It was racist, it was anti-Semitic. Yes, he's apologised for it, but, you know, why doesn't the police look into this? Should there be an investigation? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. We will keep talking about that as time goes on. Gary Lineker, of course, standing down from the BBC. And something else in regard to Israel, much more serious, of course, is the fate, the humanitarian fate of people there in Gaza, how they're being treated by Israel, whether aid is getting in. And Israel's ambassador was summoned to the Foreign Office this afternoon and was given a dressing down. There was a joint statement last night. I haven't seen as strong a statement, I must say, a joint statement between the UK, France and Canada warning of sanctions, and the UK announcing today it's suspending trade talks. And of course they summoned the ambassador. Israel has a statement which I'll read in a second, but there's a clip from Keir Starmer on this. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
But first, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something about the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend we coordinated a response with our allies, as set out in my statement with President Macron and Prime Minister Connelly last night. And I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
Well, a spokesman for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said, following the UK's announcement that it will suspend free trade agreement negotiations with Israel and impose sanctions on settlers, even prior to today's announcement, the free trade agreement negotiations were not being advanced at all by the current UK government. More than that, the agreement would serve the mutual benefit of both countries. If due to anti-Israel obsession and domestic political considerations, the British government is willing to harm the British economy, that is its own prerogative. The sanctions against residents of Judea and Samaria are unjustified and regrettable, especially at a time when Israel is mourning yet another victim of Palestinian terror, Tisla Gez, of blessed memory, who was murdered on her way to the delivery room. Doctors continue fighting for her newborn's life in hospital. The British mandate, the Israelis say, ended exactly 77 years ago. External pressures will not divert Israel from its path in defending its existence and security against enemies who seek its destruction. Well, Yoram Confino is Israel correspondent for The Telegraph. A very, very strong exchange of words there between your country and my country, Yoram. How do you assess this?
It's been a long time coming. I'm not surprised, and I'm also not surprised about Prime Minister Netanyahu's reaction. It would be weird if he backed down just because Keir Starmer told him to do that. Netanyahu is banking on Keir Starmer, Macron, and the Canadians bluffing. He's already lifted the blockade into Gaza. 100 trucks with aid came into Gaza today, and he's hoping that this will be enough for them, not just those 100 trucks, obviously, but in the coming days, that the more aid that comes into Gaza will be enough for them to back off on their threats. Now, but it's a game he's playing, because we don't know. We don't know where they're going to go. Maybe Keir Starmer has other plans, and if you start sanctioning Israel along with Macron and Canada and other countries, they'll have huge repercussions for Israel's economy.
What do you make of the fact that Canada and France being allies on this, not really that surprised? I was slightly surprised that the three of them got together for this statement. What's been the reaction in Israel?
Look, Israel feels like the world is ganging up on them. I would say that many Israelis understand why, because they don't share Netanyahu's view on how to handle the war in Gaza. So many Israelis understand this. Many Israelis are dumbstruck when they hear ministers in Netanyahu's cabinet saying the most insane things that are basically giving ammunition to all the anti-Semites out there, but also to people saying you're committing war crimes. When you have a minister saying let's wipe out all of Gaza, let's throw 2 million people out of there, that's just horrendous. So I would say people in Israel are angry with the world, but they're certainly angry with the government, because essentially Israel has every right to continue to try and get the hostages out, either through war or through negotiations. But it's not okay, obviously, to starve people and to hold aid. It's just an own goal. You're just destroying people's lives in Gaza, but you're also destroying Israel's reputation in the international system.
When do you think this sort of tipping point came here? I mean, we've seen action by Britain. I haven't seen a statement like that, certainly since the 7th of October, or indeed before then. Why do you think this is happening now? Obviously, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is absolutely dreadful. There are starving people there, innocent civilians, and actually quite a number of people, and maybe you could tell us about this as well, standing up against Hamas. Quite a number of protests with many people, despite the fact that a number of people previously in smaller protests had been executed, tortured and brutalized by Hamas.
Look, many of these countries look to the United Nations to get an assessment of what the situation is like in Gaza. The United Nations has a tendency to cry wolf often, and to predict or warn about things that are never actually materializing. But in this situation, not having aid coming into Gaza since early March, eventually you reach a point where you will get starvation. And I think this is the tipping point that everyone has agreed that, all right, we're actually here. Even Netanyahu said, well, we can't have images of famine coming out. So the fact that he's beginning to realize it, Donald Trump said that there's going to be starvation. I think that gave all of these countries the green light to say, well, let's go hard now on Israel.
Yotam, thank you again. That's Yotam Confino there, who is the Telegraph's man in Israel. He's also the author of Netanyahu's Israel, Rise of the Far Right, which is very proudly on my bookshelf, a signed copy. Colonel Simon Diggins is a military and defence analyst. He's obviously a former senior officer in the army. Simon, this is a real nadir of relations between our country and Israel in recent years, isn't it?
No, I think it is. Peter, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
It was also very interesting what Yotam said about the reaction within Israel itself, and we had the kind of spokesman, if you like, bouncing back on the rhetoric. What's also interesting, worth noting, is the way in which the US is responding at the moment. The US is clearly a key supporter of Israel, as indeed most of us have been over many years. But on his recent tour of the Middle East, President Trump very clearly did not go and visit Israel. He visited all the countries around, but did not go there. Vice President Vance was supposed to visit Israel this week and has refused to do so as well, and has made some excuse for not going. There's a sense in which Israel has been isolated by people who in the past have always been its strongest allies. The Israelis were not consulted over the ceasefire with the Houthis, or indeed with President Trump's conversation with the Iranians about their nuclear program. So there's a sense now, I think, that hasn't existed up to now, that Israel, if it does decide to conduct its imminent invasion or its potential invasion into Gaza, will be completely on its own. People are not prepared to stand by them and stand alongside them.
Is there a sense, I mean, my frustration as someone who absolutely 100% believes that Israel has a right to exist, I want people to live in peace there. If there's a two-state solution in the future, great. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But, I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it, for people? And I know you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Simon, but I know you're someone who feels roughly the same way. And essentially you want to say, let's get this sorted. But Israel, the Israeli government, not the Israeli people, but the Israeli government, in my sense of this, is they are their own worst enemy here. They're handing a propaganda victory to Hamas here because they're starving children, innocent civilians who've done nothing wrong in Gaza at the moment. There are incursions into the occupied territories as well. This is a terrible situation for the people who live in Gaza, and Israel is not making it better. It's making it slightly better by putting some aid in, but at the same time, if you want to defeat Hamas, if you want to get the hostages back, I'm not sure what the game plan is here, and I'm not sure Netanyahu does either. Do you, Simon?
No, I'm not clear myself. I think there's always been two issues. One is an absolutely legitimate response to the horrific Hamas attack. And the murder of all the innocent Israelis and then the hostage taken, absolutely legitimate and completely correct in what they did. But there's always been this like sense that there's been another agenda running there, which is all about making sure that there can be no two-state solution by effectively ensuring that the one element of it, the Gaza, is effectively removed. And when you've got the equivalent of our Chancellor of Exchequer, you have Minister Smotrich talking about effectively the elimination of Gaza as a place. and he's sitting in the cabinet. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where our Chancellor is briefing one way and the Prime Minister is briefing another way.
The beauties of the very strange coalition that Netanyahu has had to assemble, and actually Yotam's book is largely about that. Simon, can I ask you about something else, actually, which is fury as army chiefs have banned troops from supporting veterans who many people say have been betrayed. This is largely in relation to Northern Ireland, but there are other conflicts as well where veterans are being pursued legally through legal routes, and there is a sense of a war on our boys and girls who have done what they were told previously. Some of them, of course, have broken the law and should be brought to justice, but army chiefs are saying that current troops should not be expressing opinions on this. What do you make of that, especially as someone who has commanded many in the army yourself?
Absolutely, and I'm a strong supporter of the petition that's currently running at the moment, a parliamentary petition, to actually stop this lawfare, one of the original sponsors for this. I mean, it's absolutely shameful, and I think this is what the army chiefs, and indeed all the chiefs, now need to recognise, because the government is currently coming for the Northern Ireland veterans, but the mechanism they're using would I regard an abusive extension of the ECHR and the Human Rights Act. You know, they're coming for you next. So you've got to stop this now. We've got to stop this persecution. When our soldiers deployed and fought and operated in Northern Ireland, they did so under law. Now, no doubt, along the line, a couple of people may have. You
have 300,000 people serving in uniform. There will be some bad people in that 300,000. No doubt about it.
You're talking probably less than one hand in terms of the numbers. But effectively, what the government has allowed the courts to do is have open season. All our operations to Northern Ireland were according to the law, and even special force operations that were specifically signed off by the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland and by the General Officer Commanding. If they shot somebody, a coroner's inquest took place. In other words, law before the operation, law on the operation, and law afterwards. And what the government's proposing to do is to pull the plank out from underneath that, expose our veterans, and not just the veterans now, but our future veterans. You know, it's shameful that I'm afraid that our army chiefs have chosen to stop them from signing. I urge all of your listeners, please, Peter, and I've sent it to your producer. I've put the petition asked it to be put up on your website. We need to stop this. We need to stop this, not just for the veterans, and I'm a Northern Ireland veteran, but for all our serving soldiers now and for the future as well. I'm really passionate about it. It's really got to me, and I'm forgiving the emotions come out as well.
That's okay. That's absolutely fine. It's perfectly understandable in the circumstances. And as someone whose life was protected by the armed forces, someone who grew up in peace because of their incredible contribution to the peace process in Northern Ireland, which is often forgotten, I can completely understand those thoughts. I'd love to talk to you a bit more about that in future, but for the moment, we'll have to leave it. That is Simon Diggins, Colonel Simon Diggins, a military and defence analyst. Thank you to him. Lots of calls, texts, tweets, voice notes coming in. We'll take some of those in a minute, and we will talk about this bizarre story about kids breaking the law if they kick their ball over a neighbour's fence. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Don't live next door to a school or playing field if you don't want a ball in your garden, but these people have been given compensation for it. We will talk to Andrew Allison in just a second about that and get your views too. Stay with us.
what do they mean by black? I mean, do they mean just dark-skinned people? The Beaker people were dark-skinned. They're genetically close to the people from Sardinia. But they were all blue-eyed, and they had swarthy skin like a Mediterranean. And those were the people that we believe built Stonehenge. But there's a world of difference between somebody from Spain or Portugal and somebody from sub-Saharan African.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just to say on the story about prosecuting veterans, we have asked the Ministry of Defence for a statement, but they haven't got back to us just yet. On Lucy Connelly, another key matter of law in our country today, let's hear a voice note from Matt.
This whole thing with Lucy Caldwell and the sentence that she got, it's absolutely disgraceful. It stinks of making an example of somebody and stinks of typical authoritarian governments and regimes making examples of people who they don't like what they say. Yes, what she said was pretty disgusting, but I agree with you, it should be no more than a caution. But the whole authoritarian tone just goes with this Labour government.
Thank you for that, Matt. You can send in voice notes, of course, through WhatsApp on 0344 499 1000. Emily in Wiltshire sent me a text message on the same number. If Lucy had to receive a sentence, could it not have been a suspended sentence? Any prison-fearing mum would have learned the lesson. I know even the thought of prison would have terrified me when I had young children. We'll talk about this on another story about, honestly, the most bizarre story about a couple getting £1,000 of compensation for having footballs kicked into their back garden. We'll get into that in a second, but Andrew Ellison is the head of campaigns for the Popcorns for Popular Conservatism. Andrew, just your reaction to the Lucy Connelly story first, if you don't mind. Hello and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Peter. Well, I thought at the time that the sentence was completely disproportionate. It should have been a quiet word in her shell, like a police caution, and that would have been it. And I believe that many years ago, that's exactly what would have happened. Yeah. But I was genuinely surprised, though, that the appeal failed. I thought that considering she's been in prison now for nearly 10 months, or thereabouts 10 months, I thought that the appeal would have been successful, or they would have at least said, well, she can be released now. So I'm surprised that she's still there.
Yeah. Well, we will see what happens in regard to any reduction. She's probably going to serve about 40% of that because of what's happening at the moment in the crisis in our prison. So that's one of the very few plus points in all of this, and that she'll be out before too long. Andrew, thanks for your reaction to that, but I want to talk to you now about kids kicking footballs over garden walls. The High Court says they're breaking the law. A couple have sued their next-door neighbours. This is Mohammed Bahati and his wife Marie Anne, who've been awarded damages after complaining footballs from their neighbouring school were landing in their garden. Over 11 months, 170 balls fell into their garden. The High Court has ordered Hampshire County Council to pay the Bahatis £1,000 in damages for a period of time where there was excess use of the all-weather play area and when significant numbers of balls were crossing the boundary fence. Alison, this is a load of balls.
I couldn't have put it better myself. I will give you my top tip of the day, though, Peter, if you're ready for this.
Go for it. Go for it.
If you have an aversion to footballs being accidentally kicked into your garden, don't buy a house or live in a house adjacent to a school or a playing field.
That's a crazy notion. I mean, there's just far too much. What's the thing that's in that? Oh, yes, common sense. Sorry. Yes, Andrew. I mean,
did you know there's something else about this story that just made me laugh as well? Is that they were complaining about 170 footballs being kicked into their garden over the course of 11 months. I mean, that's about the equivalent of about 3.5 footballs a week. About every other day, a football has landed in their garden. Our garden is adjacent to a playing field. We get balls kicked into our garden, but it's called an occupational hazard.
You actually live beside a playing field yourself?
I do, yeah.
So what do you do when they say
brilliant?
When they say, "Excuse me, sir, can I get my ball back?" You know.
Well, you get all of that, but it's absolutely brilliant because we've got a gate that goes onto it, and our 8-year-old can go and kick a football around quite safely.
I think we should be encouraging children to play football and to get out actually in the fresh air rather than sitting behind their controlling devices and all the rest of it. But Hampshire County Council, that'll put a smile on people's faces there who are paying their higher council tax bills at Hampshire County Council, that Mohammed Bakhati and his wife Marie-Anne have got £1,000 in damages. It is just utterly absurd. And the fact that it got to the High Court, I mean, that's going to cost both the council and they're going to have to pay the costs of this as well. It's going to be a lot more than £1,000, isn't it?
Oh, it's be tens of thousands of pounds, without a doubt. I think the judge said in his ruling that the couple had lost perspective or something like that. Well, you can say that again. Of course, I wouldn't have awarded them anything if I'd been the judge. So why he awarded them £1,000, I don't know. Other than perhaps to say, well, you've won the case. £1,000 is a very small amount of money for a council, but it means, as you quite rightly said, Peter, that taxpayers will also be on the hook for all the court costs. So I think that's probably the reason why.
Andrew, thank you so much. That's Andrew Ellison there, who's head of campaigns at the Popular Conservatives, speaking a lot of common sense there. Have you had a bad experience of balls being kicked into your garden? Maybe you think you should sue, bring it all the way to the High Court and get £1,000 out of your local council. Is that the way to do it? Or is perhaps the way to do it just throw the balls back and just say, well, you know, when the kids come in and say, excuse me, can we get our ball back? Yes, of course, go and take it. Off you go. Try not to do it again. Try not to hit the glass greenhouse. Thank you. Forgot the name there. So yeah, I mean, it just seems absolutely absurd. Your kids are breaking the law if they kick their ball over a neighbour's fence. Yes, really. This is Britain 2025, I'm telling you. Lots to discuss in the next hour. We're going to talk to Lance Foreman, former MEP and businessman, in a second about the EU bill and the EU deal. We're going to talk about the man who helped smuggle more than 3,000 people into Europe. He's been jailed for 25 years. Get a sports update as well, and plenty of your calls are coming in. Please let us know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Lots of people getting in touch about all sorts of issues, including Lucy Connelly. James says, if speaking out feels dangerous now, imagine how much worse it will get if we stay silent. Very good point there. Lots more to be made in the next hour here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive with me, Peter Cardwell, sitting in for Jeremy Kyle this week and next. Thank you so much for your company. Loads of people getting in touch. You can too. There's a lot to discuss this Tuesday evening, especially in regard to Lucy Connelly, the woman who put a quote on Twitter. It incited racial hatred. She pleaded guilty to that. She's been sentenced, as we know, to about 2.5 years more, actually, in prison. She appealed that, and the appeal has been denied. So she'll continue to be in prison for some time yet. What do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. We're talking about the prosecution of veterans as well. We've just received a statement from the Ministry of Defence that I'm going to read out in a second. We're also talking about the EU deal that Keir Starmer has done. He says it's all marvellous, everything will be wonderful, and we'll be able to get through the E-gates sooner. That's something I'm sure many people will look forward to. But is it actually worth the price that we have paid, the many millions, the many billions that we're going to put into that? In fact, the Government Minister, Emma Reynolds, was asked about that this morning. She couldn't say how much money this deal is actually going to cost us. What do you think about it? 0344 499 1000. Kemi Badenoch as well. The Tories falling behind the Liberal Democrats in the polls. They're fourth now, wither the Conservatives. And of course, Reform UK doing really, really well. And about a third of Conservative voters saying that they would vote Reform now. Is Nigel Farage unstoppable, especially in the wake of this EU deal? Loads to discuss over the next couple of hours. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. You can follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss between now and 7. Let's do it together here on Talk. Well, as promised, just before we talk about the EU deal, I will read out the statement from the Ministry of Defence. It's a spokesman says, we don't do spokespeople on this station. You're a man or you're a woman, so I'm going to just assume it's a man. An MOD spokesman said, as the public would expect, official social media channels must comply with relevant guidance, including impartiality and neutrality. The guidance quoted by the newspaper also makes clear that non-official accounts are separate entities and free to post whatever they wish. So that is the Ministry of Defence have told us that. Keir Starmer as well, he's been in Parliament today selling his deal. We'll have a look at that in a second, but I just want to read you a tweet that he sent at 5 to 3 this afternoon. He says, you know how it goes. All you want to do is start your holiday, but you get off the plane to never-ending queues at passport control. My deal with the EU means more Brits will be able to sail through the E-gates instead, getting you to the beach sooner. Well, I'm sure you're delighted at that, and that makes all the sacrifices worth it, including the 12 years of fishing rights the EU countries are going to have into our waters. Earlier, the Prime Minister faced MPs as the backlash to his EU deal is growing.
Does it drive down bills? Does it drive up jobs? Does it strengthen our borders? And in each case, the answer is resoundingly yes. These deals release us from the tired arguments of the past and, as an independent sovereign nation, allow us to seize the opportunities of the future. A clear message sent across the globe that Britain is back on the world stage. That is what these deals represent. A signal that we're back on the world stage, a global champion of free trade, playing our historic role on European security, but above all, making deals that put money in the pockets of working people. Because, Mr. Speaker, that is what independent sovereign nations do.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, leader of the opposition, this is what she had to say about it.
When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. The terms are improved for the EU. And the Prime Minister can dress it up as much as he wants, but he has failed. It is bad for bills, it is bad for jobs, and it is bad for borders. This is not a deal made for Britain. This is a deal made for Labour's PR, to show them on the world stage. But it is a stitch-up for our country for their short-term headlines.
Lance Foreman is a former MEP and businessman. It joins me now. Lance, good evening to you. Thank you for joining me today. What do you think of this deal?
No one was calling for this deal, Peter. I can't see the point of it. I can't see any benefits whatsoever, apart from perhaps the one that you referred to earlier, that we'll be able to get through queues at airports a little bit faster. But the one thing the Brits are very good at is queuing, so he's even undermined that.
It's a very fair point, and I actually came through the system when to France and came back about a month ago, and the French border security guard had to say, "Oh no, you go in this queue. Remember Brexit," and it was literally about 30 seconds more than the other one. And
yeah, this is a joke, Peter. You know, our country has some serious problems, and I think the public made it pretty clear what concerns them at the time of the local elections. The big issues in our country are obviously immigration, net zero, taxes, red tape as well, deregulation. None of these will be enhanced by this so-called reset that Keir Starmer has done. In fact, in every single one of those situations, we'll be in a worse position.
How will we be in a worse position? How will we be in a worse position in regard to immigration? I mean, we know this youth and mobility scheme is perhaps coming. We don't know who it actually applies to. We don't know how many people there are going to be. We don't know what the limits are. We don't know what sectors there are. There's a load of questions still, aren't there? And but what Keir Starmer is saying, well, after 2 or 3 years, they'll all go back.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is we're unable to control our immigration at the moment. And if we're opening the doors to more immigration, it's simply going to make it harder to control. Youth unemployment in Europe is very high. It's actually been growing here almost to the same levels. So we might have a lot more young people. And as I understand it, when they talk about youth unemployment, they're talking about up to the age of 35. Not real sort of, students that are just school leavers.
Yeah, 35-year-old people aren't really young, are they?
No, well, we like to think we, but no, they're not. They're not sort of people between school and college or straight after university. And if the door is open to all those people, it's going to be even harder. We can't control it at the moment. It's not going to be easier to control our borders. It's going to be harder. So there's certainly no help on that front. On net zero, if we do, so I certainly feel a sense that people feel enough is enough with net zero, and actually we need not only cheaper energy, but we need to be energy independent. Now, with this deal, we're going to have to get the EU's approval to do anything we want to do to water down net zero. Why? Who is asking for this? It's absolutely suicidal for Britain. Keir Starmer, he's just destroying everything we've got.
I mean, Lance, if there's one thing you know about, it's fish, and feel free to send me some free salmon if you want to. But on a more serious note, Lance, I am being serious, but on an even more serious note, tell me about the fishing rights aspect of this, because no part of the fishing rights aspect seems to be a good deal. I mean, there's no sense that our fishermen haven't been absolutely screwed here.
Well, that's right. I mean, the fishing deal that we had initially, which wasn't a great deal, was supposed to come to an end next year, which was, a great opportunity for our coastal communities to start reinvesting. And now Keir Starmer has gone even beyond what the EU were asking for and tied us down for another 12 years. This is, again, it's absolutely disastrous for our coastal communities. No one was asking for this. What is he doing? He's just selling our country down the river. Nobody is asking for this, and I can't see who benefits. It's an awful negotiation. Absolutely awful.
We're hearing as well from Rachel Reeves that a Gulf Pact may be next with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with other countries. Clearly, Keir Starmer thinks he's on a bit of a roll here in regard to the fact that we've had a deal with India, we've now had a deal with the EU, we've had this American sort of deal, and the Middle East, or at least the Gulf states, may be next in that regard. Is that something that you as a businessman see as hopeful?
Well, potentially, although, now that we have this this deal with the EU, which has dynamic alignment of rules rather than mutual recognition, it might be harder for us to do trade deals elsewhere. But in fact, you know, this afternoon, Keir Starmer has just cut off a trade deal that we were pursuing with Israel and pretty close to securing. He's actually stopped that. You know, one of our closest allies. I know we're changing the subject slightly, but Hamas put out a statement welcoming Keir Starmer. I mean, he must be really proud to have a brutal jihadi regime praising the British government. This is just shocking.
They've taken a very, very firm stance on this, a lot firmer than I think we have at any point previously. And as you correctly say, the Israeli ambassador there being summoned to the Foreign Office. Clearly, you don't think this is... Yeah, okay. Lance, thank you for that. There's Lance Foreman there. He's a former MEP. He's a businessman as well. And lots of people getting in touch, including Mark, who says, is Liar Starmer just limits jobs and strengthen borders? Well, Mark, for the last couple of days, we've been asking 10 Downing Street, saying, give us a minister. Let us explain to people, to our viewers and listeners who are very annoyed about this, who are very worried about this, what are the benefits? I will do a fair interview. I will ask them questions such as, what are the benefits of this from your perspective? But no, so far, there hasn't been a government minister on this programme. We're still asking. There's still time between now and 7 o'clock. They can come on. They're very, very welcome to do so. Most people in the UK, this person says, can't afford a holiday, so what difference will e-gates make? It's pathetic. Dave says, when Keir Starmer said he was putting the UK back on the world stage, I didn't expect to be in a pantomime, says Dave in Hull. Oh yes, you did, Dave. And Brian from Rotherham says, I live next to your railway line. Can I get compensation for all the trains going by? Do you know what? There's a lot of work being done on a flat near me and those angle grinders are going. Maybe I should get £1,000. It'd be nice. Hi, I'm Bob. About the bowls, I do think this is nonsense if you live near a park or a school, but with just neighbours, I have put up with bowls hitting the adjoining fence for over 20 years, and trust me, it drives you mad. Something should be done about this. Lots of people getting in touch about that one. And Lucy Connelly as well, if speaking out feels dangerous now, imagine how much worse it will get if we stay silent, says James. Ian in Bloxwich, is that how I pronounce it? Bloxwich, says, regarding the Foreign Office, imagine getting a dressing down from David Lammy and trying to keep a straight face. Lots about Gaza as well. We'll get to all of that as well. And on the EU deal, many, many people getting in touch, including Anthony in Leeds. Anthony has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. You're very welcome to the programme. What do you think of this deal, Anthony?
Well, I think what it is with this European Union, what it's done since 1973, it's destroyed this country. It's destroyed the Conservative Party. It's destroyed the old Labour Party. That's what it's done. It's never been right since. They never should have signed that piece of paper in 1973.
Listen, I think a lot of people will agree with you. This has been a very, very... Sorry, say again?
That's what it's done to this country.
Yeah, the issue of Europe has torn apart us politically. It's torn apart the Conservative Party. It's made huge changes, hasn't it? But this deal specifically, Anthony, is there anything in it that you think is any good?
No, not really. Just the same thing. These people in Parliament and people south of England, they're fanatics. They're fanatics about the European Union. Them in Europe do not like us. Okay. Look at Japan. Right, listen, Japan, they're not Chinese, are they?
Well, certainly not.
Well, we're not Europeans either. Okay. It's a cut-off point.
Anthony, thanks for your thoughts there. I think we are actually European. We're not members of the EU, of course, but we are part of the continent of Europe. So not the physical continent, but we are European. That is a fact, I'm afraid. Even though a lot of people are not too happy about it. I don't see myself as European. I see myself as British. But there we are. Miranda is in Cumbria. It's giving me a ring as well. Miranda, what are your thoughts on this?
Hello. I was just wondering about the resetting, which Keir Starmer has
He switched it off and he's switching it on again.
Yes. Now, I was just wondering, when Brexit happened, people who were living in France, who were spending a long time in France, then I think they were only told they could spend a maximum about 12 weeks in France. Has that changed now so that many of the Remoaners who maybe have a second home in Nice or somewhere within the south of France, can they spend longer now?
I don't know the answer to that, Miranda, but certainly I'm sure it's a concern of Keir Starmer and his mates in Islington.
That's what I thought too.
Are they not uppermost in your thoughts on this difficult day, Miranda? I mean, they're having a tough time if their second home, if that's in jeopardy, you know, in the south of France. That's a tough one. I mean, they might have to cut back on the olives.
Yes, I know. It must have been terrible for them.
Yeah, very good points, Miranda. Thanks for your call. That's Miranda who's giving me a call from Cumbria there, 0344 499 1000. Fiona in Edinburgh says, just a thought, but if we are becoming more answerable to the EU, will Labour have to repeal the VAT on school fees, given no European nation does this? One can only hope some good comes out of this undemocratic so-called reset. Labour are anti-British, says Fiona in Edinburgh. Stuart in Wigan says, do you not think it's worth discussing the latest YouGov poll? Yes, we are absolutely doing that throughout the programme today, and we're talking to Mark Francois a bit later on. I'll throw him a question on that. It really does look like we've hit a tipping point where voters are walking away from the Tories en masse. Reform are no longer a protest vote. They even look set to win all the seats in my local Wigan area, which has just been rock solid Labour territory for such a long time. So Stuart, thanks for your message. Yeah, absolutely. We're discussing that poll, which has put the Conservatives into 4th place. Reform first, Labour second, Lib Dems third, and the Conservatives 4th. Colleen says, can you explain to me and probably many others how Starmer managed to sign deals with the EU without being first debated in Parliament? I mean, that's a very good point. He is the Prime Minister and he can do these things, but he knows he's going to get it through. It'll be debated anyway in Parliament, but he's got, 411 MPs were elected on the 4th of July. Hard to believe it's nearly a year ago now, and he can basically do what he wants. That's where things are. Dave in South Gloucester says, when will Starmer get it into his head that most of us Brits are aware and concerned with the big picture, the state of our nation, and the damage he is doing to us and our way of life? And the fact that we may or may not be able to get through European passport controls quicker is not a major concern for us. And we do not regard it as a win. Certainly not worth giving away what Starmer is giving away, says Dave in Gloucester. Listen, thank you for all your messages. We'll get to more of them. We'll get to more of your calls. We're going to talk to Danny Shaw in a minute, police and crime and justice commentator, former advisor to Yvette Cooper, and with the man who helped smuggle more than 3,000 people into Europe. He's been jailed for 25 years. Also, Greg's making a change in regard to shoplifting, and Lucy Connelly as well. Loads of people want to talk about her. If you want to get your point across, give me a call, 0344 499 1000. Back in a minute.
What do they mean by black? I mean, do they mean just dark-skinned people? The Beaker people were dark-skinned. They're genetically close to the people from Sardinia. But they were all blue-eyed, and they had swarthy skin like a Mediterranean. And those were the people that we believe built Stonehenge. But there's a world of difference between somebody from Spain or Portugal and somebody from sub-Saharan African.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now then, let's talk about the home affairs issues. Danny Shaw is with us. He's a police and crime and justice commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper. Good afternoon to you, Danny.
Hi, Peter. Good afternoon.
A couple of stories to go through. We'll talk about Lucy Connelly in a minute, but there's a story about a man who helped smuggle more than 3,000 people into Europe, being jailed for 25 years. I'm sure Keir Starmer's going to be happy about this because it'll feed into his thoughts about smashing the gangs. Just tell us the details of this story.
Well, this is a man by the name of Ahmed Ebid, who went by the name of Captain Ahmed. He helped organise the movement of around 3,800 migrants from North Africa to Italy across the Mediterranean over an 8-month period to June 2023. 3,800. Some of them ended up in Britain, and he has been jailed today for 25 years. He had previously been in Italy, was convicted of attempted drug smuggling, served 5 years in prison, and then made his way to the UK in a small boat in 2022. He applied for asylum. No decision was made on his asylum claim. He was living in Home Office funded accommodation in London. And he was caught essentially because the Italians were tracking some of the phone signals that were being made by migrants as they crossed the Mediterranean, and they noticed that some of them were going to a phone that was registered or that was certainly coming from the UK, and it was traced to Ebid. There was some surveillance and a bugging operation, and then the evidence was gathered against him. He was arrested, prosecuted, and today has been convicted. And that is a really hefty sentence. And the judge, Adam Hiddleston, was absolutely damning in his remarks. He said the treatment of the migrants was horrifying. He said your primary motivation was to make money out of human trafficking, and there was a considerable risk of death that the migrants had sustained as they made that very dangerous trip.
This guy, clearly an absolute scumbag. The Italian efforts there working with the UK authorities clearly paid off.
Absolutely. It shows the benefits of cooperation between the various countries involved. Look, this is really good news that he's behind bars, but he's just one person. And the sad reality is, Peter, that his space will have been taken by others who will be organising and managing those operations. And we know that the small boats arrivals in the UK, at least this year, are at sort of record levels. So, we need more prosecutions and convictions of the organisers of the people like him.
Tell us about Greggs, the hot food shop, making a major change to stores in an attempt anyway to tackle shoplifting rates. We saw a big investigation by The Sun a few weeks ago and people just stealing huge amounts of food from Greggs. Very little that could or indeed was done in regard to that. And now Greggs are taking action, putting a lot of things out of reach.
Yeah, another sign of the sort of epidemic of shoplifting across the country. Remember, in England and Wales last year, there were 516,000 offences reported to police. So that doesn't include all the shop theft crimes that go unreported. 516,000, that was up 20% in a year. And what Greggs has done, because it's so concerned about this problem, is that it's ditching self-service fridges. So, those fridges that you just
literally you open the fridge, you take the sandwich out of it, and you can't go to the counter. So that's going in a number of them.
That's going. You'll have to buy your goods over the counter. Ask an assistant to get you a sausage roll or a sandwich or a drink or whatever from over the counter. I think it's a pilot scheme. I don't think it's going to be rolled out to every single Greggs store, but they're certainly trying it out in some. I mean, we've already seen in some supermarkets, I know a local branch of Tesco's, but it's almost like walking into a bank. The cashier's got a screen up behind them. This is really shocking how shop theft really wasn't a huge issue if you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it suddenly just emerged. The gangs, the thieves have just seen it as an easy touch, and the figures are just...
And many security guards told not to engage, not to apprehend people, to be there as a deterrent, but not to actually do anything about it because of the risk of prosecution. It's a very, very big issue. Tell us your thoughts on Lucy Connelly. We've been talking about this, as you can imagine, Danny, all afternoon on the programme since her appeal was denied. You're a long-serving Home Affairs commentator. Her sentence does seem excessive, and there has been no change to that today because her appeal has been rejected.
Okay, so my thoughts about it are, first of all, I have great sympathy with her in terms of losing a 19-month-old baby some years ago. I can't imagine what that must have been like and the trauma that she still suffers as a result of that, and how what happened in Southport may well have triggered sort of reminders of that awful event. And I also have some sympathy for her and her husband and her 12-year-old daughter, who, you know, are there having to cope by themselves while their wife is in prison. That's the case for many thousands of prisoners, by the way, and it doesn't make it any easier. So I have some sympathy for that. And I also do think that the sentence was a tough sentence. I think it was harsh. But I also think that if you read the judgment, and I have read the Court of Appeal judgment very carefully, I think you can see why it came to the decision that it came to. It wasn't there to say, oh, let's shave a couple of months off the sentence. That's not what it was there to do. It was there to see whether or not the sentence was manifestly excessive. And the arguments that were made by the lawyers on behalf of Lucy Connelly and herself, because she actually gave evidence herself, which is very unusual in an appeal case, by the way, those arguments just didn't win the Court of Appeal judges over, very experienced panel of judges. And they basically said, look, you know, she admitted in a declaration that she signed with her lawyer that the words that she used were essentially an incitement to serious violence. She was convicted of inciting racial hatred, but the effect of it was an incitement to serious violence. And because of that, she was then in the top bracket in terms of sentencing. That's why she got the 31-month sentence.
Danny, I'm sure you will appreciate the anger, the frustration of so many of our viewers and listeners in regard to that sentence, and the fact that it hasn't been reduced in any way on appeal today, because there are many allegations, some of which I think are true, in regard to two-tier justice in this country, in regard to so many criminals who get, you know, someone mentioned Mike Amesbury previously, who physically assaulted someone and got a 10-week suspended sentence. Hugh Edwards, who is a paedophile, who will not spend a day behind bars, he got a suspended sentence as well. Could this not have been a caution? Could more common sense not have been applied to this? And I think there'll just be a lot of sadness and anger and frustration that at this at least appearance of two-tier justice. I wonder what you think about that.
I think that the problem, Peter, is that when you compare one case of inciting racial hatred, which was quite a serious charge, which she admitted, with other unrelated cases about online child sexual abuse in relation to Hugh Edwards, and other cases, the Mike Amesbury case that you've cited. When you compare them, you are talking about a fundamental reshaping of the sentencing system if you want to go down that road. What you cannot do is just take one case that was linked to the riots.
But people do. People do.
No, I know
that's how they see it.
Yeah, no, Peter, I completely understand that people say that, and don't think that I haven't had those sentiments about some cases that I've seen in the past.
Sure.
People have got away with something where I think they should have gone to prison or gone to prison for longer. But but that's not the right approach to take. If you want to go down that road, then what you need is a complete overhaul of sentencing and say, well, actually, we regard online child sexual abuse as so serious it should always incur a prison sentence, and inciting racial hatred isn't so serious, so it shouldn't. But what you can't then just do is pick 2 or 3 cases out and compare them. What you can do is say, this took place in the midst of a very febrile atmosphere, and it was posted to 9,000 of her followers, retweeted, I think 310,000 people viewed it, reposted 940 times. That is not the same as making a statement, you know, in your living room in front of a couple of members of your family. You are posting those views, calling on people to do the, you know, really terrible things to thousands and thousands of people. That's how you have to view it, in a very febrile atmosphere, and you can't lose the context with these things. And I also think it's dangerous to start comparing with other types of offending because they sit within different sort of overall brackets. If you want a complete sentencing overhaul, that's fine, but
I think I
wouldn't
probably do,
compare.
actually. I think I probably
Okay,
do.
fine. Well, David Gauke's announcing his review this week.
I'm sure everything will be massively sorted out and everything will be fine. Perhaps we'll talk about that, Danny, as time goes on. Danny Shaw, thank you. Police and crime and justice commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper. Gary says, so we've locked up a people trafficker for 25 years. Great. The problem is this man was arrested in 2023. So he's been behind bars for the best part 2 years while awaiting trial, yet the number of people being trafficked into this country has soared in the meantime. So what does that say about Starmer's strategy of stopping the boats by smashing the gangs? One gang smashed, illegal boat crossing increase. Brilliant. Ian in Walsall says, are they going to deport the wife and children of this despicable man for human trafficking and gather the proceeds of crime? I think not. Lash says, hello there, as a renowned and much-loved political nerd. I was wondering if you could explain the political mechanism that allowed our Prime Minister to make a deal like this without a debate in our seat of democracy. It seems a little bit dictatorial to me. What he would argue is that he does the deal, then Parliament debates it, then Parliament votes on it. So, listen, Labour has a huge majority, there's no problem for them, it'll go through, there'll be no issue. So essentially he can do what he wants. That is parliamentary democracy, I'm afraid. That's what happened nearly a year ago when Labour got 411 MPs elected. I don't think they'll get quite the same in 2029. We're actually going to talk about the poll that's out today that puts the Conservatives fourth and Reform first. Leslie says, who put the e-gates barriers up against the EU travellers? It was the EU. Thank you to this person who says, children can't use e-gates, so families will not reach the beach sooner. Another illustration, out of touch government, as if this is something anybody recognises as a tangible asset worth selling our country back to the EU. Total fools, I despair. John says, I was born in the late 50s and I've enjoyed living in what was the best country in the world. I now no longer recognise this country as that and wonder how on earth did we get to this point where we have had successive recent governments who have totally abrogated their responsibility and acting in the best interests of British people. This country is quickly becoming like a third world country, and under this appalling, traitorous Labour government, things can only get worse, says John. Margaret's been in touch and says, what a brilliant interview Priti Patel did with Mike this morning. I think Priti would make a great leader, says Margaret in Birmingham. And that's Margaret of Margaret and Lisa in Birmingham. Yes, thank you. They wrote to me. Very, very nice people. Very, very kind. Wrote to me a couple of times, actually. Thank you, Margaret. Really appreciate your note. Really, both of them, really lovely. I know you're a big John Denver fan as well. So, unfortunately, we don't play music on this station, but I hope he's filling up your senses at some point. So, yes, thank you for that. Really appreciate that. Another person says, since our Queen died, we've totally lost all respect for this country, and in my opinion, only Reform UK can put us on the right road to put the great back in Britain. On this EU deal, we've got some exciting news, and that is that a Labour minister will be joining us a little bit later on in the programme. James Murray, who is one of the Treasury ministers. I'm going to be putting a few questions to him a little bit later on in the programme, so that news has just come through in the last couple of minutes. We're going to talk to you in just a second. Loads of people want to get in touch about Lucy Connelly, about the EU deal, about Israel. We will take a number of your calls in just a second. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much for everybody who has got in touch, including Leslie. He says, so the police are considering the Lineker post. What is there to consider when it's in full sight? Well, that's a big question. What do they actually need to think about there? Well, Leslie, thanks for that point. And actually, we're going to talk to Keith Rowe now, who's Vice Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. This is police considering an investigation into Gary Lineker over the anti-Semitic Instagram post. Keith, what do you think they should do?
Well, I'm glad to hear that the police are considering it, but as your previous correspondent just said, what are they considering? Get out there. He has caused a huge amount of distress among the Jewish community. The Jewish community, many groups across the spectrum of the Jewish community have been calling for charges against Gary Lineker, or if not charges, certainly calling for Gary Lineker to be fired. This has been going on months. It's not this last tweet that he suddenly apologized for because he's been called out for it. It's a whole series of actions over months, if not years, where he has been, according to some, baiting the Jewish community.
The thing I find most curious about Gary Lineker in all of this is not just the fact that he denies knowing that a rat is an anti-Semitic symbol when it was used by the Nazis. He said that Suella Braverman, for example, the then Home Secretary, was using language akin to the Germans in the 1930s, essentially talking about Nazi language then. So he seems to know quite a lot about what the Nazis did, but he doesn't know that they used the symbol of a rat as an anti-Semitic symbol, which is a strange gap in his knowledge. The other thing I find interesting about Gary Lineker is that he says silence is complicity. Do you know what he tweeted, Keith, on the 7th of October when one of the most horrendous attacks against Israeli and Jewish people was happening? He tweeted, "Spurs are top of the league, isn't that great?" and nothing about the 7th of October. So I find it interesting on two counts there, and I do wonder whether officers from Scotland Yard could perhaps get a bit of a move on this.
Well, I don't suppose they can prosecute him for silence, but nobody in their right mind believes for 1 minute that he didn't know what he was retweeting. He's very well advised. He knows what the tropes are that have been used over generations. He knows the buttons to push to upset the Jewish community and presumably to appease those that he wants to appease. And nobody believes that in his apology, he apologized because he was called out, because there's been such a furore over it. He should have been fired a long time ago. In fact, pretty much everybody that I've spoken to about this in the community, and it is a current talking point, is just upset as to why he's still presenting Match of the Day for one final episode.
If it's so bad, he should be gone by now, and the BBC should have sacked him. He shouldn't have had any ability to go on his own terms.
But there is far more to this than that, because the BBC itself has been so biased, it is frightening. Ever since, well, before October the 7th, but certainly since October the 7th, the bias that we've seen, the facts left out from the BBC, the twist that is put onto news bulletins from the BBC, for anybody that still watches it. Most people I know just turn off now, but if you do watch their incessant broadcast, they seem to have a bee in their bonnet about Israel, about Gaza. It's as though it's the only conflict going on in the world. They are constantly making negative comments about Israel. There is a definite BBC bias. I've attended, there was a whole report done just a few months ago by a very prominent lawyer, pulling out literally thousands of instances where the BBC has either deliberately skewed a particular broadcast or left out pertinent facts if it's not completely biased the other way. And this whole business with Gary Lineker is on the back of the BBC's failure to give a straightforward broadcast as to the facts as to what's happened in Gaza. This is the real problem. The BBC, Gary Lineker is one representative of the BBC which is completely out of line. And many people feel, for lots of reasons, but certainly this reason, that they should be cancelling their license fees and that they should be moving on from the BBC. Why should we as taxpayers have to pay for the BBC giving us propaganda from a terrorist organisation?
Well, it's supposed to be impartial, but clearly fails on that. Keith, thank you. Keith Rowe there, Vice Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. Grace has given me a ring on this from London, 0344 499 1000. Grace, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi. Yeah, I found it strange hearing various people in recent days saying that they didn't know about the significance of rats as a horrible trope. If you don't know about that, you don't need to boast about it in defence of Gary Lineker.
Boasting about your ignorance, and also don't retweet stuff like that anyway.
Yes, and I wouldn't have thought that Gary Lineker would be unaware, especially given how he's referenced Germany in the 1930s. I find it hard to believe that he's anti-Semitic just because I like to think the best of people. But as you pointed out, he said silence is complicity, and I really cannot get my head around why he and so many others are, if they believe silence is complicity, are silent about other issues and only talk about Gaza. Now, I'm really concerned about what's going on in Gaza. It's horrific. I'm not in any way debating that it isn't, but there are more people suffering from the horrific conflict in Sudan. There are people suffering from horrific conflict in Congo. There are some people in some parts of Nigeria suffering horrific conflict at the hands of certain jihadist groups. Some of these conflicts could also be described as genocide, but Lineker and people aren't talking about those.
It's not just Lineker either, Grace, is it? It's first of all, you're absolutely right, and I agree with every single word you said there. The other thing is, people do not come out to march, well, some people do, but very small numbers, to march in the streets of London or to have protests about Sudan, about Congo, about Nigeria, because they can't blame Israel.
Well, indeed. I mean, and people will say in response to this, well, it's because our government is supporting Israel and we're complicit with Israel. But actually, a lot of these conflicts are connected in one way or another to us. For instance, the conflict in Congo is connected to the trade in minerals that we all benefit from. So we should care about those human beings. I'm really concerned about those human beings, and I really wish that people like Lineker would, if they're going to use their platforms, would use their platforms to raise awareness of the conflicts that aren't already being talked about. Because Gaza's already being talked about, so if silence is complicity, why not break his silence on other people in our world who are suffering, who we could be making a difference for? Because people who are starving in Sudan, for instance, because of the conflict there, we could be helping them, but we're not, because it's not being talked about. It's really good that we're talking about Gaza, but we should also care about human beings elsewhere. And it feels like a kind of, I don't know, like he's jumping on a bandwagon, or that's what he's been doing,
Grace,
more than necessarily being humanitarian.
Grace, call of the day. That was absolutely superb. You talked total sense. Thank you for that, Grace. Really appreciate that. Peter's in Oxfordshire and has given me a ring about Lucy Connelly. Peter, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Kate. I'd like to say that I think it's appalling that this woman, Lucy Connelly, has been made an example of when there must have been lots of people at the time who could have been selected for deterrent sentences. In her case, the mitigation was quite considerable, and the judge seems to have ignored most of that.
Although the Court of Appeal says that's fine, and everything in the original trial was done properly.
I can't believe that the Court of Appeal was entirely satisfied with that. It seems to me that the judge went well over the top, and the Court of Appeal seemed to have simply treated this as a sort of show trial, in a sense, that they've just upheld what the judge has decided and decided that this woman has got to be made an example of.
Am I right that you have a legal background yourself, Peter?
Yeah, this is true. I mean, when this offence was originally introduced, I think the maximum was 2 years.
Right.
It's now been increased to 7 years. I think that was as recent as about 2020, but I retired by then, so I'm not absolutely au fait with the exact date. But the point is that she's been given a sentence as a first offender, pleading guilty with lots of mitigation, a higher sentence than she would have received before the new act was increased.
Well, it's a fascinating case. It's a very worrying case, and thanks for your comments on it. Peter there, Peter in Oxfordshire. Lots of people getting in touch, including Robin Lynn in Ramsden Heath, who say Starmer was happy to allow all kinds of criminals out to reduce the prison's overcrowding, but not poor old Lucy. So unfair. Well, I think she probably will be allowed out once she's served 40% of her sentence, I would imagine, because the prisons are so full. We will see. Certainly, if it's not a violent offence, there is 60% remission. You spend the other 60% on licence. Phil says there are 2 borders in Gaza. Why no sanctions against Egypt? Very good point. We don't talk about Egypt enough. Paul in Belfast. What about Egypt? Nobody mentions the fact that fellow Arab state Egypt does not send aid into Gaza. Yes, that's right, Paul, because Israel's always wrong about absolutely everything, and we must remember that. Mark in Norwich says, I don't agree with you. It is not 3 times worse. It is 100 times worse, because 4 years would have only trespassed on Starmer's term, but 12 years lumbers Farage with the menace caused by Starmer. This is Mark in Norwich, who's talking about the restrictions on the fishing licence. Well, listen, Farage, we haven't actually heard from him in the last couple of days, but could Nigel Farage actually renegotiate this deal? Is that something that he might have as a manifesto pledge? I wouldn't imagine Reform UK would be happy with this deal at all. In fact, we know they're not. We heard from Richard Tice earlier on in the programme, earlier on this afternoon, I should say, in Ian's programme. But could Reform UK, if they make it into government, have another deal with the EU? They will, of course, say that they will do Brexit properly. Mike in Lincoln says, I've never heard so much nonsense as I did from Starmer a bit earlier on in your programme, saying the only way to free the hostages is a ceasefire. Tosh, the only way to get the hostages freed is for the terrorist scum who kidnapped them on the 7th of October to set them free, says Mike in Lincoln. Bob in Chiswick in West London says, I totally agree with your analogy of don't live next to a football pitch. For a couple of years, the bandstand in Bournemouth couldn't have brass bands, as people from a new development complained about the noise, the bandstand. What? You live near a bandstand and you're complaining about the noise from the brass bands. I mean, first of all, the noise from brass bands is generally quite nice. I played the trumpet. In fact, I have grade 3 trumpet, I'll have you know. And I like playing in a brass band. It wasn't really a brass band, it was a school orchestra. But anyway, people complained about the noise. The bandstand had been there for decades. I do love a brass band on a lovely summer's day. They're back now, says Bob in Chiswick. Thank you for that. It's just absurd. Leslie says, Starmer has sold us out to the EU and destroying democracy. Now he's going after our veterans. There weren't any Brexit arguments until Starmer opened them. And Phil in Portsmouth says, since Starmer is trying to sneak us back into Europe, how long do you think it'll be until he puts in a proposal that we can start driving on the right-hand side of the road? I don't think that's going to happen, Phil. Jane says, we are still waiting for cheaper bills promised before the election. Remember, not 1 penny more on your council tax, cheaper electricity bills. The Prime Minister never keeps his promises. It has been a long 10 months. As every day passes, we get closer to the next election. Let's hope there's a country left by then, says Jane. Well, one country we're going to in a minute is Spain, Bilbao, because Alex Crook is a TalkSport football reporter. He's going to be talking to Dean Ashton, the former England striker, about the big match tomorrow night, Spurs versus United, the Europa League final. It will, of course, be live on TalkSport. We'll get a little preview in a second here on Talk.
This is just the latest, let's face it, ridiculous disaster that Labour have presided over.
This ought to be the end of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
If there was any justice, this would be the end of the Labour Party. I mean, throughout my 14 years in Parliament, I saw that the Labour Party in Parliament was completely disconnected from the working people they purported to represent.
Right.
They have gone on and on and on about niche cultural issues in ways that I know, because I'm from a working class background, that normal working people are not interested in those niche cultural issues.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now then, up to 80,000 Manchester United and Tottenham fans are expected to descend on Bilbao in Spain for the Europa League final tomorrow night. Alex Crook is chief football correspondent at talkSPORT. He is live there now. Alex, big occasion for both clubs. Tell us about the atmosphere, presumably building with every moment.
Absolutely. Never mind your paella and tapas. It's a full English here in Bilbao as Manchester United take on Tottenham in the Europa League final. Not just silverware at stake, but a place in the Champions League next season worth more than £100 million for the victors as well. It adds to the tension, the atmosphere bubbling nicely around this incredible city. You can see the beautiful San Mamés Stadium behind me. 52,000 will be packed in there tomorrow night, generating quite the noise. The game, of course, live on talkSPORT. Dean Ashton, part of our commentary team, former FA Cup final goal scorer with West Ham, is alongside me. How will the two sets of players be feeling 24 hours before the big kick-off?
Extremely nervous. I think obviously the only thing is they've got some players in there, they've got experience, they'll be trying to pass that on, of course, to the younger players, but there's nothing really that prepares you for, you know, big finals, especially European finals. So they'll be nervous, they'll be in their own thoughts, I would expect, thinking and trying to focus really on the job at hand tomorrow and what your role in that is.
Who needs this more? Because both have had incredibly bad seasons in the Premier League, 17th and 16th in the table respectively. This is Manchester United's 9th final in their last 10 years. They're bidding to win a trophy for the 3rd season in a row. Tottenham haven't lifted any kind of silverware since 2008. Ange Postecoglou, their manager, is likely to depart the football club, win or lose tomorrow night. Who does it matter for most?
I think it's Tottenham and I think it's Ange. You know, he's stuck his neck on the line and said that he wins things in his second season, and he's got that opportunity to and to show everyone that he's correct. And
you're a big supporter of Ange Postecoglou. You think he's done a good job, even though they've lost 21 games in the Premier League this season?
Well, let's be honest. He's not played his best team in most of the Premier League games because they've been concentrating on the Europa League for probably the last 2 or 3 months, and the injury list has been ridiculous at times for him. So I've cut him a bit of slack, and I think I've seen enough of big performances against top sides under Ange Postecoglou to see that I think there is something there. It isn't a club that goes and pays the biggest wages, so they're having to improve players and bring in young players, and he's got them to a final. I don't buy into this. Even if they win, it's been a bad season. I do not buy into that. I'm very much a person that thinks your job as a manager, especially at a big club, is to win things and win trophies, and lots of Tottenham managers haven't been able to. He's got that opportunity to, and if he does, to me, it's a very successful season.
And I mentioned there that the stats around Manchester United, even though they've been at a very low ebb for, a good decade now, they still regularly compete in finals, they still regularly win trophies. Might that be a deciding factor tomorrow, that experience of getting the job done in the biggest games?
Yeah, I think it could be a big factor. There's a reason why they're able to win finals, and it's because of the weight of history that the football club has That feeds into the players' mentality. I'm sure it'll be the same again tomorrow, but you're never quite sure what's going to happen on the night, who's going to perform, is there going to be a big refereeing decision, etc. So it's hard to call, that's for sure, but it's got to help, hasn't it, to know that you're capable of winning trophies very recently as well for the players that are in the squad.
And just talk me through the stadium behind me. We've got all these giant lighting displays outside. They can change the colour outside the stadium. It's a very steep ground inside, very atmospheric. What have you made of it?
I think it's magnificent. I think obviously seeing it on telly is one thing. To be here and see it in the flesh is another. Mightily impressive. And then once you step in, it doesn't disappoint. Like you say, that bowl effect, I think, is brilliant and will create a great atmosphere. And as a player, again, you walk up those steps and out, and it inspires you. It should do anyway. It should inspire the players to want to go out and perform and entertain in what is a really difficult, pressurised situation.
It's definitely going to inspire us to give our best performance live on talkSPORT tomorrow. It's the Europa League final. It's an all-English affair. It's Manchester United against Tottenham.
Alex, thank you. That's Alex Crook there, talkSPORT chief football correspondent in Bilbao. Of course, the Europa League final tomorrow night. He was chatting there to Dean Ashton, the former England striker, of course. Full coverage on talkSPORT tomorrow night. In the next hour, we're going to talk about all sorts of things. We're going to talk to James Murray. He's the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. I will be asking him very simply, in this EU deal, what's in it for us? I can see what's in it for the EU. What is in it for us? We'll talk about Kemi Badenoch, the Tories falling behind the Liberal Democrats in at least one poll, and fury as army chiefs are banning troops from supporting veterans in public. Mark Francois will be with us as well for the Conservatives. So lots to talk about there. Lots of people getting in touch as well. You can too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can use the news break to make your call. Get your voice on the air between now and 7 o'clock. Plenty to talk about here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell and you're with Talk Drive. I'm here between now and 7. We've got Mark Francois coming up, the Conservative MP, talking about the betrayal of veterans and new rules that the Army has said that people cannot tweet from their accounts in support of those veterans. We're also going to talk to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. Finally, after 2 days, we've got a government minister who's going to actually explain, in his view, what the benefits of this EU deal are. We will talk to James Murray in a few minutes' time. We're also discussing today Lucy Connelly. Her appeal has failed. She will continue to be in prison for some time yet after her tweets. We're hearing about that in the news as well. Also, Kemi Badenoch is in trouble. She's been in trouble for some time because the Conservatives have gone to 4th in one poll. We'll speak to Joe Twyman, the pollster, about that a little bit later on. Lots of people getting in touch about Israel, about Lucy Connelly as well. The Israel development is, of course, that the ambassador has been summoned to the Foreign Office, given a dressing down, and there has been a suspension of trade deal discussions with Israel. We'll talk to James Murray about that as well. Loads to discuss. I want to make sure you get on the air too. I've actually a couple of callers waiting to speak to me. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Whether you're at home, whether you're out and about, whether you're one of the car dwellers on your way home, you're very welcome to Talk Drive. I'm here between now and 7. Stay with us here on Talk. Right then, let's speak to Benji in London, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Benji, you're very, very welcome to the programme. What is your view on what the UK has done today in regard to Israel suspending those trade talks?
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Benji.
I'm very concerned with what the UK is doing because Hamas themselves have come out congratulating the UK, along with, of course, France and Canada, for what they've been doing over the last 2 days. And I'm also concerned because, according to the Israeli Foreign Ministry statement, the trade talks weren't going anywhere anyway, which shows that actually this government doesn't value our important relationship with Israel at all.
What, Benji, I think we've spoken before on my programmes, if I remember correctly.
We have.
Great. So you will know, and I hope I'm coming from an honest perspective here, that I am about as pro-Israel as you can get in regard to someone who believes it absolutely has a right to exist. I support the Israeli people who've been through hell in the last couple of years. It is becoming increasingly difficult for people like me to justify what is going on in Gaza at all. In fact, I don't think I can justify it. And I think the Israeli government needs to do more to get aid in and to help innocent people who are starving. Hamas are monsters. They're dreadful, dreadful people, and they should be eradicated. And Israel is a really, really tough battle on its hands to continue to do that. I want the hostages back right now. Hamas are 100% responsible for that, not Israel. What would you say to people like me, Benji, who want to be helpful, who want to support Israel, but at the same time are really worried about the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Gaza?
Look, Peter, I completely agree with everything you've just said. And in terms of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, I think the best thing to do by thinking about it is, I don't believe what Israel's done by blocking the aid is actually illegal, considering the fact that Hamas have been stealing the aid and therefore they do actually have a right to not allow it in. However, that being said, if we want to improve the situation there, it's important that we talk about it. But I also think the UK government, for example, instead of doing this kind of political posturing thing that they're doing, they could start trying to get countries to maybe absorb some refugees, trying to maybe put some pressure on Qatar and Iran and Turkey to force Hamas to release the hostages and surrender, so then there will actually be an end to the war as well.
Benji, I'm talking to the UK government, a UK government minister, in a few minutes' time, and you've just given me exactly the question I'm going to ask him, so stay tuned. Benji, thank you very, very much indeed for your thoughts on that. That's Benji in London. Mark's in Lincolnshire and wants to talk about Lucy Connelly. Mark, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi there, Peter.
Hi,
Great
Mark.
show, mate.
Thank you.
Hi, no problem, bud. Yeah, I mean, basically, I don't really get this whole thing with Lucy Connelly, if I'm honest. I mean, it's not that it goes over my head or anything. I mean, she was certainly hard done by. You know, the sentence is way too severe. But I really don't see why everybody keeps getting their knickknacks in a twist over this, because the offence is still there. I mean, at the end of the day, she was, well, for whatever reason, okay, she was still calling for the, what was it, along the lines of, you know...
Well, she admitted and she pled guilty. She pled guilty to inciting racial hatred. That is what she did. But you can understand, Mark, can't you, why people are thinking, why on earth is she in prison for such a long time?
Yeah, well, like I say, Peter, I have no issue with people being upset that she's, you know, in prison. I mean, like I say, my opinion, you know, really should have been a suspended sentence, you know, mitigating circumstances. And
I think an awful lot of people feel the same way, Mark. I think a lot of people agree with you on that. I appreciate that. That's Mark in Lincolnshire. We're going to talk now to James Murray, who is the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. He's a Labour MP for Ealing North as well, and of course a government minister in the Treasury. James, good evening to you.
Hi, good evening.
James, lots of people can see what's in this for the EU, in this deal. I can certainly see that they have benefited tremendously from it. How have we as UK citizens actually benefited from this deal, do you think?
Well, I think this is a landmark deal, which is going to help people in Britain through better jobs in Britain, through bringing down prices at the checkout, getting more money in people's pockets, and also through boosting the economy, boosting economic growth, which is so important to what we're trying to do as a government. So, yeah, I think this is really good news for Britain in terms of jobs, in terms of prices, and in terms of economic growth.
How is it going to create jobs?
Well, we know that this helps to boost trade with Europe. So there's an SPS agreement, which is to do with trading, exporting and importing between the UK and the EU. This reduces the barriers to that trade, which makes it easier and cheaper to do. That helps to stimulate our economy. There's also other parts of the agreement, for instance, the defence and security elements of the agreement. That means that the UK manufacturers and the defence industry can look to access some of the EU's defence fund, which will help to support jobs here in the UK. So this is good news for all different sectors of our economy.
Do you accept that we have taken on more regulation and more rules from the EU?
What I would accept is that we've come to an agreement which we've gone into with eyes wide open, and we've decided to have an agreement with the EU that's in our national interest, because, you know, we're approaching these negotiations as an independent country, as an independent Britain, and we have decided that it's in our interests to make sure that we have an agreement with the EU which reduces some of the border frictions that impact on trade. And I think, you know, if you want evidence that this is good news for trade and good news for businesses, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. You just look at all the businesses who've come out over the last 24 hours to say how important it is for them, you know, not just the representative organizations like the CBI, Federation of Small Businesses, but also big firms like M&S, Morrison's and so on, all coming out saying this is good news for Britain and good news for jobs and the economy.
I mean, you mentioned the CBI there, Confederation of British Industry, clearly a very important body, but also a very anti-Brexit body. And I wonder, within the context of what you're saying there, you haven't quite answered my question, but I think we can infer from it that we have taken on more rules and more commitments, that this will cost us money, and it also erodes Brexit, doesn't it?
Well, no, let me just be clear. You said cost us money there, Peter, and there is no money going into the EU budget as a result of this agreement, as was the case when...
Are we not paying anything for any of these access to any of these markets? There is no cost whatsoever to the UK.
Well, look, there will be cases where making a contribution from the UK is in our interest because the benefits from it.
So there is money
huge.
going into the EU.
Let's say there's already money going into EU programs.
But there's going to be more.
Well, look at the Horizon programme as a good example.
But there's going to be more. The point is, there's going to be more of our money going into the EU. That's what's happened.
If we decide on a case-by-case basis that putting some funding towards EU IT systems, for instance, delivers a huge benefit for the UK, that is a common sense reaction. That's a common sense thing to do because it's about putting some support in, to get much more support, much more benefits back for the UK. And I think that's what this is about. I think most people, to be honest, looking at this deal, looking at what the agreement that we've come to, will see it as being common sense, because I think people are a lot less interested in fighting the battles of the past, a lot more interested in what's going to happen in the future. People want to see that we are serious about creating jobs, about making people better off, about bringing down prices at the checkouts. That's what people want to see we're serious about.
Talk about James.
Serious to help with that.
Okay, James, you talk about the battles of the past. I mean, the fact is, your side lost a battle in 2016. 17.4 million people voted for Brexit, and many of them contacting our station feel that Brexit has been eroded, that has been lost, that actually we're closer now to the EU than we were. There's not a lot of love necessarily for Boris Johnson's deal. Let me just finish the question. Let me just finish the question. There wasn't a lot of love for Boris Johnson's deal, but there's not a lot of love from our viewers and listeners for your deal. Perhaps you could try to convince them.
Well, you asked me how we respond to the way that people voted in the Brexit referendum, and the way that we respond is to say, absolutely, we accept the outcome of the referendum. We are not going back to the EU.
The Prime Minister called for a second referendum, James. The Prime Minister called for a second referendum.
Peter, I'll let you say your whole question. Let me give a proper answer to it, all right? The point is that we've said very clearly, we are not rejoining the EU. We are not rejoining freedom of movement. We are not rejoining the single market. We are not rejoining the customs union. These are our red lines, and we have stuck to those red lines. But what we have delivered through this deal is in the British national interest. It is a huge step forward in terms of our trade, in terms of supporting and creating jobs, in terms of what it does to bring down prices for people at the checkout, and it does all of that within our red lines. That is common sense. It maintains the red lines that we agreed post-Brexit, but it advances British interests, and that's what we're doing as a government.
When was the last time you went through an e-gate?
Last time I went through an e-gate, I think when I came back from holiday recently, I went through an e-gate in the UK.
Keir Starmer has sent a tweet where he says, you know how it goes, all you want to do is start your holiday, but you get off the plane to never-ending queues at passport control. My deal with the EU means more Brits will be able to sail through the e-gates instead, getting you to the beach sooner. If you have children, they can't use e-gates, so actually you're not going to get there sooner, are you?
Well, I think we've all had experiences where we turn up at airports and if you can't use the e-gate aisles, you have to wait a lot longer. This will speed things up for a huge number of people going from the UK to countries in the EU as we see this rolling out across the continent. This is about taking away some of those frictions which are getting in the way of people, enjoying their holidays, getting to their destination quicker. And this is a tangible benefit from the deal that we struck.
James, thank you for your thoughts on the EU deal. And I just have one more question specifically on that, and it's to do with fishing. So the Prime Minister said he's putting £360 million of taxpayers' money into helping our fishermen and women. Why do you have to do that if this is a good deal for us? And originally we wanted 2 or 3 years, 4 years maximum of access to the waters, but now it's 12. How did that happen?
So the extension of the agreement for 12 years brings stability for people in the fishing industry so that they have that stability over the next 12 years. But alongside that stability, as you rightly said, Peter, we've announced a £360 million fund to support fishing communities across the country.
But why have that fund if it's a good deal? If it's a good deal, you don't need to put an extra 360 million quid into it, do you?
Well, because we want to support those industries. We want to support the communities where fishing industry operates out of. And this is a way of us showing how serious we are about that support for those local communities right across the country, alongside making sure that they've got that stability and new export opportunities. The Scottish salmon industry have praised the deal. They said how good this is for them wanting to export salmon to the EU. The part of the deal is about removing the ban on exporting shellfish from the UK. That's obviously a good thing for all of those fishermen and women who catch shellfish and want to be able to export them. So this is good for economic growth. It's good for the economy, but it also comes alongside this dedicated support for fishing communities across the country.
James, I know you've got to go to another interview. I just want to ask you about one more thing, and that is what the government has done in regard to Gaza today. It summoned the Foreign Office, your colleagues there, summoned the Israeli ambassador and said to her that trade talks will be suspended. Now, this measure has actually been welcomed by Hamas, who says it was a significant step in the right direction. I wonder, what the UK government is doing to put pressure not just on Israel, but because of the clear humanitarian problems that there are in the region, but also on Qatar, on Iran, on Turkey, in order to get Hamas to give back the hostages?
Well, you're absolutely right to make clear how important it is, how essential it is that Hamas releases all of the hostages that they have in Gaza. We need to see the hostages released. We need to see the Israeli military offensive ended, and we need to see aid get into Gaza at the scale that is needed and at the speed that is needed, because what's happening in Gaza at the moment is completely intolerable. It needs to be brought to an end, and by suspending the negotiations on the free trade agreement, we're showing we're serious about putting pressure on the Israeli government to make that happen, because we want to see the Israeli military operations ended. As I said, we want to see aid get into Gaza and the hostages released, because this awful, horrific conflict has to come to an end, and we're playing our part in doing everything we can to make that happen. But are you putting pressure on Hamas's proxies? Iran is sponsoring them. Are you putting as much, if not more, pressure on Iran as you are on Israel? Well, we've always been absolutely clear that bringing this conflict to an end involves the military offensive coming to an end and aid getting in, alongside all the hostages being released. And that's a critical part of bringing this conflict to an end, because of the hostages who are still in Gaza, who are kept captive by Hamas. And obviously we're working with all partners around the world and in the region to try and get that ceasefire in place, and then to move toward a lasting peace. I promise you this is my final question. Many people... You said that 3 times now. I think it's just the second time, James. But anyway, okay, right. This is a firm promise that this is the final question. There are lots and lots of people contacting our station who are really annoyed that Lucy Connelly hasn't had her sentence reduced. Do you support Lucy Connelly having her sentence appeal rejected? So look, I'm not going to comment on court decisions. There's an important principle that politicians, government ministers don't interfere with court proceedings. I'm not going to break that rule. Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. I promised it was the last question, and it is. James Murray there, who is the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, also the Labour MP for Ealing North. Your reaction to that after the break, 0344 499 1000. Here we are.
What do they mean by black? I mean, do they mean just dark-skinned people? The Beaker people were dark-skinned. They're genetically close to the people from Sardinia. But they were all blue-eyed, and they had swarthy skin like a Mediterranean. And those were the people that we believe built Stonehenge. But there's a world of difference between somebody from Spain or Portugal and somebody from sub-Saharan African.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks everybody for your messages, including Simon from Durham and Crystal, who says James Murray seems to just be speaking the party line. The truth is he has no examples because he is unclear of the details of the deal, as is everyone else. Common sense is if you make a deal, you're clear on what has actually been signed off, says Crystal. Thank you for that. Simon says James, your guest, is talking tosh. He talks about shellfish, and yet this government are self-serving, and yes, shellfish. Simon, sorry, you know I hate puns and wordplay of any kind, so I can't condone that at all. Simon from Durham there. I'm only joking, that was a very good pun, thank you. Ivor says, regarding Lucy Connelly, Danny Shaw earlier on talked about comparing eggs with eggs. Okay then, if we can only talk about the crime of inciting racial hatred, how about all those screaming for jihad on the streets of London every week? Is that not racial hatred against the Jews? Or indeed, what about Gary Lineker's tweets? 31 months in the clink for Gary? Well, he wasn't inciting racial hatred, and there's no suggestion that he was doing that. He was absolutely retweeting anti-Semitic tropes and shouldn't have been doing so. Brian in Rotherham says, I studied Nazi propaganda for 30 years, mainly the workings of it under Joseph Goebbels, and I was horrified by Lineker's tweet. The German people associated the rats on posters to Jewish people. Almost every anti-Semitic poster included a rat. He can't claim he didn't associate the significance of a rat. There is nothing more offensive than a rat. He must have known that, says Brian in Rotherham. Well, he seems to know a lot about what the Nazis did in the 1930s because he criticised Sheila Braverman for her language previously. Interestingly, she'll be on Kevin O'Sullivan's programme a little bit later on. I'll be very, very interested as to what she thinks about Gary Lineker, let me tell you. What the public think about politicians is in focus at the moment because YouGov, big polling company, has found that the Tories have slumped to the 4th place behind Reform, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Reform, which of course have been leading the polls since April, did really well in the local elections there recently, increased its lead by Labour by 7 points to 29% in this poll. The Liberal Democrats in third at 17, the Tories on just 16%, Green Party on 10%. This is just one poll, but there is a trend, and if there's a man who knows about polls trending, it is Joe Twyman, king of polls and founder of Delta Poll. Joe, this presumably doesn't come as a huge shock to you because the trend has been there, but oh my goodness, Kemi Badenoch must be worried.
Yeah, that's right. In one sense, it's not really a particularly interesting story at all. If you go back to the start of May, the same company that ran this poll ran a poll again and found exactly the same numbers for for Labour, Reform and the Greens. It's only the Conservatives and Lib Dems that have changed since the beginning of May, and even by then it's only 1 point, which is within the margin of error. So in that sense, it's not particularly interesting because it's just a continuation of the trend. But it's very interesting because it's a continuation of that trend. We've seen since the local elections, Reform established this lead over Labour that is not increasing, but neither is it decreasing. And so they've been able to hold on to that lead now consistently. At the same time, the Conservatives have continued, admittedly relatively slowly and gradually, but have continued to fall away, while the Lib Dems have similarly, slowly and gradually, gained ground. So it was inevitable with those trends continuing that at some point the Lib Dems would overtake the Conservatives, and that's happened. It's only by 1 point. It's within the margin of error. Statistically, it's neck and neck, but this is bad news for Labour. It's worse news for the Conservatives.
It's also very interesting. What I found interesting was 33% or thereabouts of Conservative voters, people who voted Conservative even in 2024 in the last election when the Conservatives did really badly, are saying that they are now thinking of voting Reform. That is certainly borne out by the anecdotal evidence I have on a daily basis presenting these programmes. There are loads of people who say I've been a Tory voter all my life, smaller number as well, and maybe you could talk a bit about that as well, Joe, of Labour voters who are saying, look, I voted Labour all my life, now I'm voting Reform UK. The trends are, these votes aren't coming from nowhere, they're coming from those other parties. And it's interesting, and I find it fascinating, how Reform UK is not just a threat to the Conservatives, but also to Labour.
That's right, and if you look at the polls, you see that fewer than 4 in 10 people are voting for the two quote-unquote main parties, the government and the opposition. That's an extremely low figure by historical standards. But it's important to think of these things not in terms of left and right, the way that we would traditionally describe them, but instead what Reform UK has been particularly good at, and to a lesser extent the Brexit Party before them were good, and even UKIP before them, is gaining support from people who are dissatisfied, disapproving and distrusting not just of an individual politician or a political party, but of the political system in this country in general. They believe that the changes that have occurred over the last 10, 20, 30 years have not been good for this country and took place without their consent. And all of that is a very potent message that that Reform have been able to really get to grips with. And they've done a great job of not necessarily creating this wave of support, but of utilising it and bringing support to them in terms of first the polls and now in the most recent election, the ballot box. The key question is for how long they're able to sustain that and whether they're able to move from a party where people vote against other parties for them to a party where people actively vote for them. And so for that, they're going to need more established, understood positions on, for instance, the economy and the NHS. But there's nothing to suggest they won't necessarily manage that, but we don't know.
Joe, thank you very much for that analysis. That's Joe Twyman there. He's the founder of Delta Poll. Thank you for that. We'll get your calls, text, tweets, voice notes and thoughts on everything Joe was saying, on what James Murray was saying and many other people as well, also in regard to Israel in just a minute here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch. We're going to talk to Peter in Croydon in just a second on what the Prime Minister has been saying about the situation in Gaza. Let's just remind ourselves what he said in the House of Commons earlier on this afternoon.
But first, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something about the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend we coordinated a response with our allies, as set out in my statement with President Macron and Prime Minister Connelly last night. And I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
Well, Peter in Croydon's given me a call about this, 0344 499 1000. Peter, what do you make of what the UK government has done today, calling the Israeli ambassador in, giving her a dressing down and saying, look, you know, we're suspending trade talks and you need to get your act together on the humanitarian situation? What's your perspective on this, Peter?
Well, last Saturday evening, we saw the public vote for Israel. 24 countries gave a maximum points. Now, where does Starmer get his news from? Probably the BBC, who their propaganda machine. I don't know if you've seen it lately, but it's absolutely. They report on this. The Undersecretary General of the UN. He said, well, the BBC reported that he said there will be 14,000 babies dying over the next 48 hours. That is 192 babies dying within.
Well, listen, Peter, whether that's true or whether that's not, nobody wants babies to die in Gaza. Nobody wants innocent civilians to die in Gaza. So what do you think the UK government should do to put pressure? I think they need to put pressure on Hamas. I think they need to put pressure on Iran. And I've just asked the government minister about that. But what do they need to do in regard to Israel, do you think?
Well, like you say, there's no balance between. It's always Israel, Israel, Israel. They get their news from the BBC, like I say.
But we've supported Israel for such a long time, Peter, and it's got to a stage now, surely, has it not?
No.
Where the humanitarian situation is out of control in Gaza.
Well, the trucks have started to go in now, as your journalist in Israel have said.
Yeah.
I trust Benjamin Netanyahu. If Richard Kemp is Colonel Kemp has been to Israel, if he come out and said what exactly the same what Starmer's been saying, yes, I would. I trust Colonel Kemp. Because he's worked with the IDF, hasn't he?
Well, I trust him too, but I also think it is undeniable that there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Something needs to be done about it. There's no doubt about that, and I think Israel have acted cruelly.
Yeah, but Peter, if there were pictures, I remember years ago, babies were dying in Biafra. I don't know if you remember it. You might have been too young.
I think I'm too young, but I know what you're talking about. I'm familiar with those pictures. Yeah.
The images of the babies, their stomachs were bloated.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see that. If there were pictures of people starving, the BBC would show them.
Well, they should, Peter, and they should.
But there's no pictures to show, Peter, because there's no people starving.
Well, there are people in a seriously bad situation in Gaza, and I've been a big supporter of what Israel has done, but I can't support not sending humanitarian aid in, and hopefully they are doing that, some of it now, but probably not enough. Peter, thank you for your thoughts. We'll continue to debate this. Khaled is in Leicester and wants to talk about Lucy Connelly. Khaled, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a bit harsh for her to be locked up, to tell you the truth. I think, the atmosphere we're living today is quite toxic as it is. Yep. People have got extreme views. I think a bit of knee-jerk reaction from her, and then I think I think maybe she should have been given some sort of community service, maybe to rehabilitate her mindset, as it were. Right? But the thing is, look, I mean, as you were just talking about Gaza right now, there's people going from the UK, committing war crimes, posting their war crimes online, coming back to the UK, and nothing happens. So, on the one side, you get somebody locked up for a tweet, and so on the other side, you get people committing crimes and celebrating their crimes
online. Well, listen, Khaled, I think there are a lot of problems with the justice system in this country. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and I think you're right in that justice is not fair. And it's not seen to be fair, and I agree with you that Lucy Connelly should have been given either a caution or a community sentence or a community service or whatever. Do you think it's possible to actually have faith in the justice system as things stand?
I'm perfectly honest with you. I've lost faith in it. I used to think whatever the law says is 100% kosher. You go with it no matter what. When I was a bit younger, but when I went through the court system, not for myself or somebody else, and I saw the lies and the hypocrisy and the pure fraud that was taking place from the top down. And that put me off completely. I realized that actually I'm too naive. I didn't realize how corrupt the system is. So therefore, what I'm saying is that, look, we should have a blanket rule as far as empathy, sympathy is concerned. What's happening in Gaza, it's not about giving them aid. Stop chopping their legs off first, and then you want to put a prostate leg on them. It doesn't make sense. Stop chopping their legs in the first place.
What should the UK government do? We talked about what
the UK government, first of all, should completely isolate Israel. They should stop.
What about Hamas? How do they put pressure on Hamas, Khaled?
there will be no Hamas if Israel stops killing the Palestinians. The Hamas only came about because of the continuous killing of the Palestinians, even before Hamas were in existence. We know this. It's all documented.
Okay, but the point is that Hamas is the eradication of Hamas is what Israel wants to do, and it is saying that Hamas is a threat to Israel, which is very clear because we've seen that and that has happened. So what should Israel do about Hamas?
Israel should stop the occupation, right? First of all, look, right now, the amount of killings they've done, the amount of innocent people they've killed, forget Hamas, it's going to be a Hamas 2 or Hamas 3 or Hamas 20. You know, they're going to be much stronger people growing up in that vicinity who are going to have... Do you really think that if they've killed somebody's child...
And listen, those points are perfectly valid. The point is, and the question remains, what should Israel do about Hamas? You're saying they should withdraw. Well, what, they should let Hamas control Gaza?
They should withdraw and let the Palestinians rule themselves. They should give them freedom.
But you know and I know that Hamas would take control again, and many innocent Palestinians, many people who are the victims of exactly what you're saying, and I'm not denying for a second that there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Of course there is. There are many, many people who are rising up against Hamas, but Hamas would take control again tomorrow if Israel withdrew, and people would have a really horrible life as a result.
But Peter, the thing is, look, bottom line is, look, Israel has I know you're not evil, right? But you may be ignorant to the facts about the Yinon plan and the plan dialect. This plan has been, it's in the Likud Charter as well. There will only be Israeli sovereignty from the river to the sea. It's not just the river to the sea. They've actually taken parts of Syria as well. They want to take parts of Iraq.
I don't think any of that's going to happen, and I don't think I'm naive about that. And Khaled, with the greatest of respect, you're not answering my question about what can be done about Hamas.
The Palestinian people should be able to decide who they want to rule them.
Would they even have that choice? Should they have that choice through a democratic election?
What do you mean? Should we have a choice who we want to elect in our country?
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm not saying Palestinian people shouldn't. But should that be a democratic election? How should that work? What would happen? Because what would happen? You know, and I know that if Israel withdrew from Gaza today, tomorrow Hamas would be back in charge.
Israel, first of all, should... I think that illegal settlements should be dismantled, first of all. This is the whole problem.
Can you just engage with my question here? Because Hamas has to be eradicated.
And when Hamas has to be eradicated, if somebody comes to your house, Peter, right, and keep on continuously battering you, and you throw a kick at them, and somebody says, oh, actually, you're Hamas.
Hamas did a lot more than throw a kick at Israel on the 7th of October. A lot more than that. They're a terrorist organisation and they need to be removed. Do you not think that?
By 2014, 27th September, Peter. 10:25. Can
you just engage with my question, Khaled?
No, I am.
Do you think? Well, yeah, you're going back in history and giving me a history lesson, and that's fine. But the point is that Hamas are not a good guardian of the Palestinian people, are they? Do you think they are?
The PLO have agreed that there won't be a Hamas ruling the Palestinian land. But the thing is,
so how do you get rid of them?
They've already agreed that. You spoke, you know, Hamas. You bring on Hassan Zumlak, the Palestinian ambassador. He said that as well. He's already stated.
They may have said that, but Hamas are not going to give up power without them being militarily defeated.
They have agreed.
No, they haven't. No, they have not said. Hamas have not voluntarily given up power in Gaza. That is not what has happened. And you know and I know that if Israel withdrew, Hamas would be in power tomorrow.
No, they wouldn't. They've already agreed that if Israel withdraws from the occupied territories, then there will be a PLO and facade between them. They will organise. They will be the ones ruling.
I think you're living in fantasy land, Khaled. But thank you for your call. Terry's in Cambridge. Thank you for the call, Terry. 0344 499 1000. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon. What I find quite staggering is the total hypocrisy of the British government. When I think back through history, anybody obviously would know that during the time that Britain was under attack from Nazi Germany, we were fighting for our very existence. Mm-hmm. And basically, we launched the most unbelievable bombing attack on Germany, killing hundreds of thousands of Germans, men, women and children, over a long period of time because we were under severe threat. Israel is fighting for its very existence. I was born in 1948 and Israel was founded in May 1948, has been fighting wars ever since. They were attacked almost within 24 hours of the country becoming a nation. Mm-hmm. The fact is that what was good for the British is not okay for Israel. They are fighting on seven fronts. They're fighting for their very existence.
Terry, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but the point is that there are many, many innocent Palestinian citizens, women, children, men as well, who are really badly suffering as a result here. That there is no...
Peter, you are wrong. Do you know...
it is absolutely correct, Terry. It is absolutely correct that there are people... Are you saying nobody's suffering in Gaza?
No, I'm not suggesting that for 1 moment. But if you listen to me, every single young child in Gaza from a very young age in school is indoctrinated to hate Israel and to kill Jewish people. That is a well-known fact, and you can check that for yourself.
That is true, but are you honestly saying that we should, kill them because of that? 7-year-olds, we shouldn't give them food?
Did we send messages to the German people to say, could you make sure that all of your children are out of the way before we blanket bombing all your cities? No, we didn't.
So is it okay then that are these people just collateral damage then, Terry?
Well, the collateral damage to Hamas, you know that as well as I do. They don't care. The more children, the more women are killed in the bombing.
But surely Israel has to be, it has been responsible in many ways, but having a blockade and not sending aid in, there are people dying as a result, and those are people who are innocent. They may be indoctrinated, that's not their fault. If you have children who are 5 or 6 years old who are being taught these things, they shouldn't be taught them. I totally agree with you on that, Terry, but the fact is that we can't just write them off and say, this is Israel fighting for its existence, which it is, I agree with you, but the focus has to be on Hamas. You cannot excuse the humanitarian situation that has developed in Gaza as a result.
Isn't it a strange thing, Peter, that all of the leaders of Hamas are living abroad? They're all billionaires. When Yahya Sinwar was killed, he was worth £2.4
Yeah, no, you're right, and I'm not disagreeing with any of those points, Terry, but I would bring you back just finally to the point about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which is a terrible one. How would you fix it?
What about the humanitarian need of the Israeli population to be able to live their lives in peace?
I totally agree with that. I've never disagreed with that, Terry, but my point is, and you're not answering my question, Terry, is how do we deal...
The answer to your question is if Israel is successful in destroying Hamas and all the other terrorist groups, both the Israelis and the Palestinians can have a great future.
Not if they're not alive, Terry. Not if they're not alive. Thank you for your thoughts, Terry. That's Terry in Cambridge. We're going to talk to Mark Francois, who is a Conservative MP, about this veterans issue next here on Talk.
This is maybe the biggest cover-up ever in American politics. Surely rivals, or at least in the same division as Watergate, and it makes the medical cover-ups of FDR and JFK seem trivial in terms of Woodrow Wilson. I should mention as well, who was that White House was basically run by his wife Edith during the last year or so of his presidency. But this one was particularly outrageous.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Mark Francois was on my show on Sunday to talk about the issue in regard to veterans and the fact that there is what many people believe is a witch hunt against veterans who have served in Northern Ireland and other conflicts as well. There is a petition now, 90,000 people have signed a petition urging Number 10 not to dilute a law shielding those Northern Ireland veterans from witch hunts. At least 3 Army regimental HQs have shared social media links to it. But the Ministry of Defence itself says troops must remain impartial, and there are many senior officers saying this support must end. Mark Francois is with me now. He is a Shadow Defence Minister and Conservative MP for Raleigh and Wickford. Mark, I can imagine what you think about this ban. Some people might argue if soldiers are serving soldiers that they shouldn't involve themselves in political or judicial issues. What would you say to that, Mark?
Well, we're talking about regimental, mainly WhatsApp groups. So, most regiments now, my old regiment, the Royal Anglians, have got one too. And it's a way for members of a regimental family to stay in contact and to promote regimental events. And a number of these regimental associations made their members, some of whom are serving soldiers, but also many of whom are veterans and veterans' family members, aware of the petition. The MOD then intervened to try and close that down. I think that's completely wrong. Now, David Davis, my colleague, who's been doing a lot of work on this campaign, as you know, raised a point of order in the House of Commons yesterday, right at the end of defence questions. So the sequence was, I raised the petition at defence questions yesterday. At that point, it had 87,000 signatures, just about. Remember, we need to get to 100,000 for a 3-hour debate. I raised it in the Commons. John Healey, the Defence Secretary, replied. We had an exchange about that. I criticised very strongly what Labour are doing. Because remember, this will help Jerry Adams, what they're proposing. It will make it easier for him to sue the British taxpayer whilst throwing our guys to the wolves. And at the end, David Davis raised a point of order with Healey still in the chamber and said it's completely wrong to suppress these regimental WhatsApp groups. They're just making people aware of the petition. If they want to sign it, they can sign it. Healey, to be fair, looked completely taken aback. I suspect he didn't even know that the MOD had done this. I mean, he looked genuinely, like he'd been blindsided.
Yes, he said to Parliament, anything that interferes with the parliamentary process is something of concern. I will certainly look into it. And that would certainly give the impression of what you're saying, that he actually wasn't aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect he went back to the MOD and, someone got an interview without coffee.
Yeah.
About why he, the Secretary of State, hadn't been told. The Speaker was in the chamber and he basically said, well, look, the Secretary of State said he's looked into it, but then he added, no one should be stifled. So that is the judgment of the Speaker of the Commons.
Yes.
So I think the MOD should reverse this. They should make a point of doing it. They should say, we're not going to stifle debate. People should be made aware of the petition, and if they want to sign it, they can sign it. And if they don't want to sign it, they don't have to. By the way, you know what I'm about to do, Peter? Anyone watching this show, if they want to sign it, we've got to, we're 10,000 and a bit to go. If they want to sign it, they can go onto the House of Commons Petitions Committee website, click in, they send you a confirmatory email to make sure you're not a bot, and then you sign the petition. We need 10,000 and a bit more names, and then we get a 3-hour debate in Parliament, realistically after the Whitsun recess, which would be in June, hopefully, and then we can absolutely expose the madness of what Labour are trying to do.
Mark, an MOD spokesman told us, as the public would expect, official social media channels must comply with relevant guidance, including impartiality and neutrality. The guidance quoted by the newspaper, The Sun, has done this story, also makes clear that non-official accounts are separate entities and free to post whatever they wish. What would you make of that, Mark?
Yes, these are, this is not, the MOD's comms department. These are regimental apps used by regimental associations. Yeah. And I think, to be fair, Healy said something like, from experience, trying to tell regimental associations what to do is not an easy thing. I was the Veterans Minister. I can vouch for that myself.
Tad has been in touch and said, I've signed it and I've shared it. So that's at least one person who has signed that.
We're one nearer. But look, as I say, to try and be fair to John Healy, I think he didn't know this order had been given. I'd like him to publicly rescind it. But, either way, the Speaker of the House of Commons has given an opinion. He doesn't want debate stifled. So, the MOD, the bureaucrats in the MOD comms department can go and take it up with the Speaker of the House of Commons.
Mark, just while I have you, could I just ask your opinion very briefly on the EU deal?
It's a complete surrender. I mean, I crossed swords with the Prime Minister about this in the Commons this afternoon. In a nutshell, complete surrender on fish and complete surrender on what's called dynamic alignment, which is a fancy phrase. But what it means is if in certain areas like veterinary science and food production, and that ultimately affects all of us, if the EU change their rules in those areas, we follow them automatically. We dynamically align. They move, we change. They move, we move. And we would do that automatically once we've signed up for this, even if Parliament disagreed with the change that the EU were proposing. The PM and I got into a bit of a spat about how that works. Ultimately, I'm absolutely clear on this. In the event of a dispute over that, the European Court of Justice has the final say, so effectively the EU has the final say. Why does all this matter? Because we become a rule taker. We go back to a position similar to when we were in the EU, that they make rules and we passively have to agree with them. That is totally and utterly against the spirit of the referendum when the British people voted peacefully and democratically to leave the EU and to take back control of our own laws to Parliament. Starmer just gave that away.
Just on polls you mentioned there's one poll, a YouGov poll, putting the Conservatives at 16% behind the Liberal Democrats, Labour and Reform. You must be worried about that, Mark.
Well, that is suboptimal. I've been a member of Parliament for 24 years. I've seen polls go up and I've seen polls go down. And it's probably a little way between now and the general election. But I think that is sending a message to me and my parliamentary colleagues that we've got to be clearer about what we stand for. And we can't wait 3 years to roll out a manifesto. We've got to start coming up with at least some policies now.
Time for a deal with Reform, Mark?
Sorry?
Time for a deal with Reform UK, maybe?
Peter, we discussed this before. They don't want a deal. You ask him, go and ask Nigel. He says he doesn't want to deal with the Conservative Party because he stood down his candidates in 2019 and we never said
fair enough.
So I think at the moment, at least, to be honest, it's an academic question. But to come back to where we came in, anyone watch this programme, two fingers at the MOD Communications Department, please. Get on the website, sign the petition, and then we can debate it in Parliament, and hopefully with the Speaker and the Chair.
Mark, thank you very much. That is Mark Francois there. He is the Shadow Defence Minister. He's a Conservative MP for Raleigh and Wickford. Lots to chew over there. He's mentioning that petition as well. Lots of people getting in touch, including on Israel. Stephen says Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2006. They insisted their own people rip up their roots and came out. Gaza then was managed by itself. Hamas took over and suppressed the ordinary Gazan. Hamas is responsible for the lack of food. End of, says Steve in Bromsgrove. Another Stephen in Lincolnshire says wartime Germany was democratically elected. Japan had popular support. The Allies killed many women and children in pursuit of victory. Why condemn Israel? Let your listeners know I support Israel, says Stephen in Lincolnshire. I do too, absolutely, and they have every right to fight for their freedom and to defend themselves. What I don't like and what I'm really worried about is the humanitarian situation in Gaza. George says, I'm absolutely disgusted by the current caller saying we should not be sending aid. I think there's a real danger in losing our humanity. Innocent people are horrendously suffering. All parties should be following the Geneva Convention, and if they're not, then they should be indicted for war crimes. That is George saying that. Thank you to everyone.